Hello, listeners. Welcome back to another chilling episode. If you have your own terrifying experience to share, please mail us to be featured in our next episode. So before we dive in, please subscribe to our small channel and leave a comment, letting me know which country you are listening from. So without further ado, let's begin the story. My daughter Emily was 16 when she disappeared. It was a Thursday afternoon warm for Ohio in late October, and she never made it home from band practice. That was 3 years ago. They found her 5 days later, tucked beneath a pile of leaves off State Route 84, wrists bound in a way that should have stayed buried with the past. She was the first, or at least the first they linked to him again. I say again because this had all happened before. The Clovich killer terrorized our town back in the late 90s, long before Emily was even born. He'd stalk young girls, mostly between 14 and 17, and leave them tied up in sick little scenes' arms, crossed like they were asleep, shoes always placed neatly next to the body. But what haunted us most was the mark. A little knot made with red string tucked into their socks, a symbol only he used. The cops caught him in 2003, or so we thought. His name was Keith Randall Moore, family man, scout leader, deacon, and a murderer who confessed to 10 victims. He got life without parole, and we got peace. For a while. Looking back, though, the signs were all there. Emily's case reopened wounds nobody wanted to talk about. People whispered copycat, but nothing about her death was public. The press barely mentioned the red string. The police kept the positioning out of reports, yet somehow the killer got every detail right. At first I accepted the official line, it was some sicko mimicking Keith Moore's crimes. Maybe someone read about the murders, dug deep into old court records, and decided to play boogeyman. But that changed when I got the letter. God. It arrived 2 months after Emily's funeral. No return address, just my name, typed. Inside was a single page, typed on a clunky old typewriter, one of those with keys that leave uneven ink spots. I still remember the first line. She smiled, Before I made her sleep, I couldn't breathe. I dropped the letter right there on the porch. The rest of the message was worse, chillingly calm, like a report. He described things nobody could have known. Things I hadn't even told my wife. How Emily wore her dad's hoodie that day. How her socks had little ghosts on them because it was close to Halloween. It's details that had never left our home. I brought it to the police. They told me it was probably someone who had access to the case files. Maybe a rogue officer. Maybe a cruel prank. But I saw the look in Detective Halford's eyes. He believed it was him. The original Clovich killer. That's when it hit me. What if Moore never acted alone? What if someone else was helping him all along? Someone who's still out there. The first time I visited Keith Moore in prison, I didn't go as a grieving father. I went as a man with questions no one else would answer. He looked older than I expected, gray, soft-spoken, smug. He smiled as I sat down across from him like he'd been waiting. Came about the girl, he said. Emily. He said her name like a friend. I asked him how he knew. He said he didn't, that he'd read between the lines in the news reports. But then he said something I'll never forget. The ones who matter always come. Back to me, he told me about letters. Not his own, but ones he claimed to have received, anonymous envelopes that showed up months apart. Always typed, never signed. One was writing to him, someone who understood the work. As he put it, I didn't want to give him the satisfaction of seeing my reaction, but my stomach turned. This wasn't just about a copycat. This was a conversation. I'll skip the boring stuff about how many hoops I had to jump through to get access to. His files, the red tape with the warden, the officials who called me a distraction. None of that matters now. What matters is what I found. Keith Moore's incoming and outgoing mail had been monitored since 2003. Sure, but only scanned for threats. Not actually read. And the ones he received in 2017 and 2018, they were missing. Just logged and gone. I found the entries in the visitor logs. Someone came to see him used a fake name. No photo ID. Just a badge number from the Department of Corrections. But when I asked about it, the system glitched. No record. I started keeping a journal. Not the digital kind. A real leather-bound. One, because I didn't want anything traceable. In it, I listed everything that felt off, from the weird way the cops danced around certain details, to the girl from the next county who vanished a year after Emily's same age, same knot, same red string. That's when I started noticing the symbols. At first, I thought it was just tagging random graffiti under overpasses or scratched into rest stop mirrors. But they were all the same, 3 lines crossing in a triangle with a dot in the center. I saw it behind the gas station where Emily last stopped. I saw it burned into the wooden guardrail by the ravine where they found her. It wasn't until I looked back through Moore's old interrogation tapes that it clicked. In one of them, he absent-mindedly traced something on the table with his finger 3 lines, dot in the middle. No one noticed at the time. Wife begged me to let it go, said I was breaking apart. Maybe I was. I wasn't sleeping. I was forgetting to eat. But then came the second letter. This time, it wasn't about Emily. It was about another girl. The letter described a girl named Madeline, blonde hair, 17. Loves art, hates math at Reed. She's mine next. I tried to warn the police. They told me there was no Madeline reported missing, that I was being manipulated. 3 weeks later, Madeline West from Bellbrook vanished walking home from a friend's house. They found her body posed the same way. Red string, ghost socks. Just like Emily, that was when I knew this wasn't over. It had never been over. Now, I keep everything locked in a safe in my garage: photos, printouts, maps with pins, marking every known site, every disappearance, every clue. But the scariest part isn't the evidence. It's what I still don't know. See, each new clue points to the same thing. Keith Moore didn't work alone. Whoever he worked with is still out there, watching, waiting, writing. For a while, things felt like they were finally moving forward. After the second letter and Madeline's death, Detective Halford stopped brushing me off. Maybe it was the matching details, or maybe it was guilt, but he started returning my calls. He even drove out to the Bellbrook crime scene with me, and we spent an hour just walking the woods in silence. For the first time, I wasn't just the grieving father yelling into the void. I was being heard, and that changed everything. Started putting together a case file in earnest, a real one, not just notes and drawings in a journal, but a printed binder with color-coded tabs, timeline charts, and victim profiles. I took out a small storage unit downtown and converted it into my personal war room. The walls were covered in corkboard panels with pins and string and scribbled notes on index cards. I know how crazy that sounds. Trust me, I do. Me. Purpose. And for the first time since losing Emily, I didn't feel totally hollow. I joined a support group too. One for families of unsolved murders and cold cases. Most of them had been waiting a lot longer than I had, some for decades, but they welcomed me in. There was a woman named Brenda who lost her niece back in '99, and when I told her about the symbols I'd seen near Emily's site, her face went pale. She said she'd seen the same thing once scratched into her niece's bedroom window weeks before she vanished. I felt the ground shift under me. It wasn't just recent, it went back farther than I thought. At one of the meetings, I met a man named Warren, a retired crime reporter who'd covered the original Clovich case. He still had his old files boxes of notebooks, microfiche copies of local papers, even an audio tape of an early interview with Moore's daughter. Warren didn't buy the copycat angle. Not entirely. He always had help, he said, tapping his temple like it was common knowledge. The timing, the spread, the planning, he wasn't smart enough to do it alone. Felt like I'd finally met someone who spoke my language. With Warren's help, I dug deeper into Moore's timeline. His job with the county took him all over the state. But there were gaps weekends where he couldn't be accounted for. Stretches where the family went camping but never checked into any parks. I cross-referenced those with missing teen reports, and sure enough, some of the cold cases lined up. It was like peeling back wallpaper and finding blood underneath. I wanted to scream, but at the same time it meant we were right. We weren't chasing shadows. There were nights I came home late from the storage unit, smelling like dust and old paper, and for the first time in a long time, my wife didn't look at me like a ghost. We even laughed once, watching an old video of Emily trying to teach. me how to use Snapchat. For a moment, the grief felt less like a chokehold and more like a bruise still there, but manageable. Looking back, though, I should have known that kind of peace wouldn't last. It never does. Because just when you start to breathe again, that's when the air gets sucked out of the room. It started small. A few pages went missing from the binder. I thought I'd misplaced them, but I was always careful, meticulous even. Then one morning I found my storage unit door slightly ajar. Nothing was missing, but someone had moved things, rearranged them. I convinced myself it was just me forgetting, being tired, distracted, but deep down I knew better. Then came the email. It was from an address I didn't recognize. No subject line and just one sentence in the body. You're digging in the right place, but you'll never find the roots. Attached was a grainy image of Emily's gravestone, not a wide shot, just the headstone. Fresh flowers next to it. But we hadn't been out there in weeks. I showed it to Halford. He told me to shut everything down. No more digging, no more visits, no more contact with Moore. He said I was being targeted now, that I was putting myself and my wife in danger. But I couldn't stop, not when I was this close, not when everything in my gut told me I was circling. The truth like a shark. That week I drove back to the cemetery. I waited in my car for hours, just watching. I wasn't even sure what I was looking for. Around dusk, I saw him tall, thin, hooded sweatshirt pulled tight. He walked straight to Emily's grave, knelt, and placed a small red object on the grass. I froze, my fingers locked around my phone, but I couldn't move. When I finally forced myself to step out and call after him, he took off, disappearing into the trees behind the stone wall. I ran to the spot and picked up the object. It was a red string, tied in the exact same knot they found in her sock. My hand shook so badly I dropped it twice, trying to put it in a baggie. That was all the proof I needed. Whoever this was, they were watching me, mocking me, and they were close. Went back to Warren and told him everything. Didn't seem surprised. They like attention, he said, but they hate exposure. If you want to catch 'em, you don't chase, you bait. That night I posted an anonymous message on a local crime forum. I listed fake details about a hidden notebook I'd supposedly found in a storage locker. Keith Moore once used something that names names. 2 nights later, someone broke into my house. Nothing was stolen, but the door to the garage where I keep the safe was cracked open. Inside, one of my corkboards had been slashed with a knife. Single red string was taped across a photo of me and Emily, taken the summer before she died. That's when I stopped feeling like I was making progress. Started feeling like I'd poked something that was already awake. It didn't happen all at once. That's the thing. Nobody tells you about fear. It doesn't always kick down your door. Sometimes it drips in slowly, like water through a cracked ceiling. At first, I convinced myself that I was just tired, paranoid. Grief does that. It rots the edges of what you think is real. But then I noticed something I couldn't explain away. My key to the storage unit was gone. Not lost, gone. Always. Kept it on a specific ring, the one with Emily's locket, and the old house key I never got around to removing. One morning I reached for it and the storage key just wasn't there. I searched everywhere, coat pockets, car seats, couch cushions. Nothing. I replaced it, of course. Told myself I dropped it. But it didn't sit right. 2 days later, I arrived at the unit and noticed the lock had fresh scratches on it, like someone had tried jamming something inside. I checked inside, and everything looked untouched. But when I went to the back shelf, the one where I kept the original map with the pinned locations, I saw that 3 of the push pins had been moved, not removed. Just nudged slightly off their marks. Not enough to notice at a glance, but enough that I knew they'd been touched. It felt like someone was telling me they'd been there, that they could be there again. That same week, my wife Rachel started noticing things too. At first, it was simple stuff, laundry folded and refolded, like someone couldn't decide if it was clean or not. Our front door mat turned the wrong way. Then she found her wedding ring missing from the dish near the bathroom sink. That was her breaking point. She accused me of moving it, of trying to scare her into staying, like I was staging things to keep us together. I didn't even know what to say. The thought that she believed I was capable of that stung more than I expected. Looking back, though, that was the moment we both stopped pretending things were normal. We changed our locks. We bought a motion sensor light for the backyard and a camera doorbell for the front. For a few days, it worked. Nothing strange happened. But one night, around 3:12 a.m., our doorbell pinged. I checked the feed and saw nothing, just empty porch, no cars, no wind. The sensor had gone off, but there was nothing on the tape. The next morning, when I opened the front door, there was a thin scratch along the doorframe, shallow, curved, like someone had slowly run a key along the wood. It felt like a message, or a dare. At work, I started noticing a guy I didn't recognize. Parked across the street from the office lot, same silver Ford Taurus, always facing out toward the street, engine running. I figured he was just some contractor at first, but when he showed up 4 days in a row, at different times, always just sitting there, I started writing down the plates. I brought it to Halford, and he ran the number. It came back registered to a car rental company in Dayton. Rented out under a fake name, burner number, prepaid. No way to trace it. Halford told me it might just be coincidence, but I could tell even he didn't buy that. A few days after that, I came home to find Emily's hoodie, the one she was wearing the day she went missing, folded neatly on our back porch swing. That stopped me cold. The hoodie had been with the police, part of evidence storage. There was no way it could be here, unless someone had stolen it from the station, or worse, made a copy. I called Halford in a panic, and he drove over immediately. He took photos, bagged it for prints, and said he'd do what he could. But I could tell by the way he kept swallowing that he didn't expect much. Like this wasn't the first time something from evidence had gone missing. That night, I had a nightmare. I was walking down a hallway lined with mirrors, and in every reflection, saw Emily at different ages: toddler, child, teen. But no matter how old she looked, she was always wearing that hoodie. And in the very last mirror, she was standing behind someone else, someone tall, faceless, holding her hand. I woke up shaking, drenched in sweat, but what stayed with me wasn't the dream. It was the feeling that the man in the reflection was real, like my brain had seen something it wasn't supposed to. The weirdest moment came that weekend. I was at the grocery store, aisle 9 cereal, and a woman stopped her cart in front of mine. She looked familiar, but I couldn't place her. Early 50s, frizzy brown hair, heavy coat, even though it was warm out. She smiled too wide and said, "She had your eyes, you know." My stomach twisted. I asked her to repeat it, but she just walked away. No cart, no purse, just turned and wandered off toward the frozen section. When I told the store manager and asked to check the cameras, he told me their system had been down since Wednesday. Power surge. No footage. That was when I started, carrying a voice recorder in my pocket. Not for safety, but for sanity. If something happened, I wanted to know it happened. I wanted proof for later because I could feel my grip on reality starting to bend. And the worst part was, I had no idea how far they'd go. It all came to a head when Rachel found a manila envelope tucked inside our mailbox. Despite the fact that it was Sunday and the mail hadn't run, inside was a single photograph, one I'd never seen before. It was Emily, sitting on the school bleachers, laughing at something just out of frame. It had been taken from behind a chain-link fence, slightly out of focus, like whoever took it was watching from a distance. On the back, someone had written in red ink, "She was never yours to keep." I didn't tell Rachel about the photo right away. I told myself it was to protect her, but the truth is I needed time to breathe. To think. To stare at that image in my garage under harsh fluorescent light and figure out how it could exist at all. The timestamp in the corner said October 3rd, 2019, 12 days before Emily vanished. But that date didn't line up with any public school event. I checked the calendar, even called the school pretending to be a local reporter looking into district activity. There were no scheduled games, no practices, nothing that would have brought her to those bleachers that day. It meant the photo was taken in secret, and probably by someone who had been watching her for weeks. That realization gutted me. Killer had been near her, following her long before we even realized anything was wrong. It made everything feel worse and more personal. That week, things at home took a turn. The cameras we installed, one by one, they stopped working. Not all at once, not in a dramatic surge or outage, just gradual failures. First, the doorbell feed froze during a delivery. Then the side motion light stopped triggering at the time. We noticed 2 days had passed with zero footage captured. I called the company. They couldn't find any errors, said it must have been a connection issue or a user error. But I know what I saw, or more accurately, what I didn't see. We're being tampered with. Someone didn't want to be recorded. Rachel started having dreams again, the kind she used to get right after Emily died. This time, they were different. She said she'd see Emily standing in the doorway, whispering things too quiet to hear. In one dream, she said Emily kept pointing to the closet in our bedroom, even after Rachel screamed at her to stop. She woke up sobbing, her hands clawing at the blanket like she was trying to dig through it. I didn't have the heart to tell her I'd been dreaming too, and we sighed. Started hearing noises I couldn't explain, creaking floorboard when no one was up. The bathroom door handle jiggling around 2 a.m., even though both of us were in bed, scraped under the floorboards like someone dragging a nail across wood. I checked every inch of that house, top to bottom. Nothing, but the sounds kept coming. Always at night. Always when the lights were off. I thought maybe I was losing it, so I called Warren again, the retired reporter who'd helped me piece together the old timelines. He invited me over, said he had something to show me. I arrived. He was already waiting in his driveway, holding a thick, dust-covered binder. He led me inside without a word and opened the binder across his kitchen table. Inside were dozens of clippings, all from small-town papers scattered across Ohio and Indiana. Most were low-profile, missing girls, unexplained disappearances, vague police statements. But each article had been marked with a small symbol drawn in pen next to the date. The same triangle with that symbol I'd found near Emily's site. I asked him where he got them. He said they'd come anonymously, mailed in batches over the years, always with a postmark from somewhere new. Last week, that's when it hit me. Whoever this was, they weren't just killing. They were tracking, collecting, watching the aftermath unfold from a distance like a director rewatching his own film. It wasn't enough to do it. They had to stay connected to it. That made them harder to predict and nearly impossible too. Stop. They didn't just want to recreate what Moore did. They wanted to continue it, improve it, refine it, like it was art to them. That thought made my stomach turn. I asked Warren why he never went to the police. Said he had multiple times, but every time the response was the same. No direct evidence. Anonymous tips are unreliable. We'll look into it. Nothing ever came of it. That was when I understood how deep this thing might go. Either the police were afraid of drawing attention to the old case, or someone inside was keeping things quiet. Maybe someone with access to the original files, someone who knew how to avoid triggering alarms. When I got home that night, I found Rachel sitting in the living room with her hands clutched around something. Her eyes were puffy, and she looked up at me like she didn't know whether to be scared or furious. She uncurled her fingers and placed the object on the table. It was a bracelet, Emily's bracelet. Cheap little plastic thing with neon beads spelling out EM. It had been in the evidence box the police returned to us after the investigation was closed. We kept it sealed, tucked in a keepsake drawer. We never opened it. But here it was, in perfect condition, lying on our coffee table. Rachel swore she didn't touch the drawer. Neither did I. I didn't sleep that night. I sat on the couch with a baseball bat across my lap and stared at the hallway until the sun came up. No knocks, no footsteps, just silence. A heavy, watching silence that settled over the house like fog. That morning, the power went out for exactly 37 minutes. Not the whole neighborhood, just our house. The breaker box was untouched. Every clock in the house reset to 3:13 a.m. The same time our doorbell pinged the night we saw nothing. That was the moment I stopped wondering if someone was toying with me. They weren't just playing games. They were sending a message. Kept coming back to the way things were, being returned to Millie's hoodie, or bracelet, the exact way the photo had been framed from a distance. It wasn't just a taunt. It was personal. Too personal. Whoever was doing this didn't just want attention, they wanted me to know, to be part of it. And that idea, once it took root, never left. I started checking everything twice, then again in the morning. I logged every movement, every night I stayed awake. What I didn't expect was for the biggest clue to come. From something I'd overlooked entirely, a box in my basement. It was Rachel who reminded me of it offhandedly when she was pulling out winter clothes. She said something like, "Your dad's stuff is still down there, isn't it, in that old metal bin?" My father passed away years before Emily was born, and I hadn't gone through most of his things since. I remembered vaguely storing it. Away after the funeral, just a few notebooks, a fishing license, military ID. That night, I pulled the bin out and sat on the concrete floor. Most of it was what I remembered. But there was one envelope tucked in the side, marked in faded black. Ink, Harlan Ridge. 2002? I recognized the name instantly. Harlan Ridge was the correctional facility where Keith Moore was first processed after his arrest. I hadn't realized my father had ever worked near there, let alone been inside. I opened the envelope and found 3 pages of lined yellow paper. They were copies of letters typed, but annotated by hand in red pen. The handwriting was unmistakable. My father's. At the top of the first page he'd written, "Confidential, transcribed from inmate correspondence. Keep quiet." My breath caught. I scanned the first few lines. The letter was from Keith Moore, to someone referred to only as R. The language was familiar, cold, precise. He spoke in vague philosophical terms, like the murders were part of some higher calling. But what froze my blood was the line near the bottom of the second page. "R's work has made it so much easier. No attention, no noise. He understands discretion." I stared at that sentence for a long time, trying to understand. Was this just some delusion, or had my father helped him? I told myself it was impossible. My dad was a career logistics guy, worked at the county supply depot. But then I thought about how much access that would have given him. Vehicles, storage keys, building schematics, maybe even uniforms. Looking back though, I should have been surprised when the pieces started falling into place. But I wasn't. I remembered how my father used to disappear for weekends, always calling it camping alone, but never bringing back photos or gear. I remembered him being obsessed with crime novels, how he'd pause true crime documentaries and shake, his head saying, "That's not how you cover your tracks." I remembered the way he looked at Emma Quiet, unreadable. Nothing inappropriate, but distant, like she reminded him of something painful. Or maybe something he wished he'd forgotten. I stayed in that basement for hours. By the time I came back upstairs, Rachel was asleep on the couch. I didn't tell her. I didn't know how, but I knew what I had to do. I made copies of the letters and drove them straight to Halford's house. Not the station, his house. I didn't trust anyone else by that point. When he read them, he didn't say a word for at least 5 minutes. Just read and reread with a pale expression. Eventually he stood up and said, "We need to talk to someone." We drove out to Warren's the next day, and the 3 of us laid everything on the table. Halford pulled up Keith Moore's visitation logs again, and this time cross-checked the badge ID with older employee files, specifically. From the county's facilities division, where my father worked until 2004, the badge number matched. My father had visited Keith Moore in prison, twice. Once in 2002, once in 2003, the same year. Emily was born. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own father had stood face to face with a serial killer, had mailed him letters, had possibly helped him carry out his crimes. But why? Why keep the letters? Why leave them behind? Maybe guilt. Maybe he wanted me to find them eventually. Or maybe he just didn't care anymore. I'll never know. He died in his sleep. No autopsy, no suspicions. Just another quiet man with a folded flag and a closed casket. But the worst part wasn't learning he had ties to Moore. It was realizing that the things happening to us now The break-ins, the photos, the stolen objects, they started after I began digging into the past. Someone was still carrying the torch. Someone who'd been there before and wasn't finished. Maybe one of Moore's old contacts. Or maybe a family friend. Someone who felt betrayed by what I was doing. Someone who wanted me to stop. Next day, I returned home to find the garage door wide open. The safe was untouched, but my corkboards had been dismantled. Every photo was laid out on the floor in a perfect line, edge to edge, like a film reel. In the center of the floor, someone had left a cassette tape with a sticky note attached. The note simply read, "You're not ready for the end." I didn't sleep the night I found the tape. I just sat in the garage with the lights off, holding it in my hands, feeling its weight. It wasn't heavy, but it felt loaded thick, with consequence. I hadn't seen a cassette in years, and the idea that someone had gone out of their way to use one wasn't lost on me. It was a message in itself, deliberate, physical, harder to trace. I didn't have a tape player in the house anymore, so I drove to the nearest pawn shop at 9 a.m. sharp and bought a used one for $18.97. Cash, no receipt, no questions. When I got home, I brought the player into the garage, locked the door, and hit play. What I heard made my skin crawl. It started with a soft hum white noise. It'd be wind, but underneath it was something worse. Breathing, close, steady, controlled. Then came a voice. Not Keith Moore's, a different one, younger, smoother. He didn't act alone, the voice said, "You're close, but you're not asking the right question." Then a pause, then a low chuckle. "The question isn't who's helping me now, it's who helped him and why they stopped." I paused the tape. My hands were trembling, sweat beating down my neck despite the cold air. This wasn't a bluff. This was proof direct communication from someone who knew the entire timeline, not a copycat. A link. I drove straight to Halford's office. No appointment. No warning. Just stormed in, dropped the tape recorder on his desk, and hit play. Listened without a word, but I saw it in his face. Something cracked. The same man who once dismissed my concerns was now gripping the edge of his desk like it might keep him from falling. When the tape ended, he looked up and said, "We're doing this right now. No more waiting." That day, everything shifted. Halford called in a special investigator from Columbus, someone outside the county network. Someone clean. They reopened Emily's case and launched a quiet internal review of evidence, handling procedures from the Moore conviction. Things moved fast from there. The safe house, the late-night interviews, the unmarked cars sitting idle on my street. Suddenly, it all felt real, like maybe someone had finally started paying attention. For the first time in months, I let myself believe there might be a way out of this. That belief didn't last long. 3 nights later, around 1:30 a.m., we were woken by the front window shattering. It was sharp, sudden, then unmistakable, the sound of something heavy thrown through glass. Rachel screamed. I grabbed the bat from under the bed and ran to the living room. There, lying among the shards on the floor, was a cinder block wrapped in cloth. Round it, tied neatly, was a red string. The same knot. The same signature. On the fabric was a message written in dark marker. "You brought them. Now you bleed." We were moved into protective custody the next morning. A safe house 3 counties away, under fake names, with strict phone restrictions and a pair of officers stationed nearby. Rachel cried. The entire drive there, silent tears running down her face. Her hands clutched around Emily's bracelet like it could protect her. I held it together for her, but inside I was shaking apart, because I knew, deep down, that this wouldn't stop. You don't scare off someone who's waited this long. You don't hide from someone who already knows your life better than you. The investigators re-questioned Keith Moore in prison. I wasn't allowed in the room, but Halford called me afterward, his voice tight. He said it wasn't his idea, Halford told me. Said he was shown the symbol. Brought in after? It already started. That it was always bigger than him. That he was just a vessel. When I asked what he meant, Halford was quiet for a long time. Then he said, he kept calling it the inheritance. That phrase stuck with me. The inheritance. Like a sickness. Passed down or a mission transferred from one believer to another. That night in the safe house, I stared at the ceiling for hours, thinking about it. About the letters. About my father. About the way Moore's crimes seemed to echo long before and long after he was caught. The shape of it all. Not random. Chaotic. Designed. That's when it hit me. This wasn't about one man. It never was. This was a system. A brotherhood. And lineage. And I had just stepped into its spotlight. We stayed in the safe house for 9 days. Each one felt like a standoff. With time, the officers posted nearby rotated out every 12 hours. Silent men in stiff uniforms who didn't ask questions. Rachel barely spoke, except to ask about our son. He'd been staying with her sister, far from town. She didn't want him to know any of it, and I agreed. Some truths are too heavy to pass down. Investigators promised they were working. The leads tracing phone records, scanning prison mail logs, combing through old badge numbers tied to Moore's visitor list. But each update came with the same empty refrain. No definitive suspect yet. Every night I went to bed staring at the door. Every morning, I woke up surprised it hadn't been kicked in. But then came the envelope. It was hand-delivered. Number. Stamps. No postmark. Just slid under the front door of the safe house in the middle of the night. Sometime between 2 and 4 a.m. during the only window the outer patrol car temporarily left to refuel. Inside was a folded piece of notebook paper. The lines faded blue, the edges frayed like it had been carried around for a long time. Written in the same sharp, deliberate handwriting as the first letters, it said, "Inheritance never ends. You picked the wrong thread to pull. She sleeps because of you. Next one won't." Underneath that was a printed image, low resolution, grainy, but instantly recognizable. It was a still frame from a home video I'd taken years ago, back when Emily was 10. She was dancing barefoot in the backyard, spinning in a circle, sunlight bouncing off her hair. The time stamp was correct. The angle was not. It had been filmed. From outside the fence, I called Halford in a panic. He arrived in under 30 minutes, unshaven, wearing yesterday's clothes. When he saw the image, he didn't speak for a while. Then he said what I was afraid to hear. This was never just about you. They'd been watching longer than we thought. He promised they'd escalate protection. But I could see it in his face. This thing had grown beyond him, beyond all of us. It wasn't just one person. It was a legacy being passed like a poisoned heirloom. I'd become part of its story. We left the safe house 2 days later, relocated again. Different names, different city. But even now, with locks on every door and cameras on every corner, I still feel it, the weight of being watched. It's a sense that I was allowed to get this far because they wanted me to, because I'm useful, because I've spread fear better than they ever could. 2 weeks ago, I found another envelope in our mailbox. No return address, no message. It's just a single item inside, a hospital bracelet. One of the cheap plastic ones with a printed name and date. Only the name wasn't mine, or Rachel's. It was my son's. And the date? The day he was born, I sat on the floor of the kitchen for what felt like hours, the bracelet in my hand. The silence of the house pressing in on every side. The police say they've launched a protective sweep and are monitoring all known associates. But we both know they'll never catch them, not unless they want to be caught, because this isn't just about a killer, or even a cult. It's a blueprint one that never got erased. And last night, it's just before 3:13 a.m. Our motion light clicked on. There was nothing on the porch but in the flower bed. Placed so neatly it could have been staged for a photograph, was Emily's. Favorite stuffed animal, half buried in the soil, perfectly clean. Its head tilted toward the front door. They're not finished. They never were, and they never will be. Every year since I can remember, our extended family planned one weekend where the women mothers, daughters, cousins, aunts would pack into a few cars and head to this remote lodge outside Asheville, North Carolina. We called it Holt Girls Weekend, even though most of us weren't girls anymore, and half weren't even named Holt. The name just stuck. No men, no phones, no pressure, just puzzles, boxed wine, oversized sweaters, and a tradition that was so deeply ingrained that not showing up felt like a betrayal. You could skip a wedding or a baby shower, but not girls' weekend. I was 22 the last time I went. My cousin Lauren, who was 2 years older than me, had been coming since she was 6. She was the golden one in our group, the one who always remembered birthdays, who brought homemade gifts, kept the peace when my mom and Aunt Denise started going at each other about politics. She was tall, sharp, and beautiful in that casual way that never felt forced. And she never missed a single year, not even in college. That's why it hit so hard when she didn't show up in 2019. No call, no text, just ... didn't arrive. First, we assumed she'd gotten delayed. Flights get canceled, people get tired, phones die, it happens. But by Sunday morning, when she still hadn't contacted anyone and her hotel room in Charleston was untouched, we knew something was wrong. Really wrong. The police traced her last known location to a gas station camera just off I-95, where she was seen smiling, sipping coffee, and heading toward the restroom. She never came back out, at least not on camera. They found her car 2 days later, Eddie. Miles west of her planned route, the doors were unlocked, the key still in the ignition, the driver's seat pushed back as if someone taller had driven it. Her overnight bag was in the trunk, half-zipped, and the back seat had a faint handprint on the inside of the window. No signs of a struggle, no blood, just ... silence. A clean vanishing. It was like she'd been erased mid-motion. I know how. Ridiculous this sounds, but our family didn't treat it like a tragedy at first. We treated it like a disruption, like Lauren had broken the unspoken rules of Girls' Weekend by bringing real-world chaos into our cozy tradition. My Aunt Deborah kept saying she probably just needed space, and my mom made comments like she was always too nice. People like that get walked all over. I couldn't believe how quickly everyone moved on. It made me feel like I was the only one who actually missed her, but I knew something had happened. I could feel it in my chest, in my teeth, in the back of my neck. That tension like a taut wire being pulled from somewhere deep underground. For months, I had dreams about her standing in a blank hallway, facing a closed door, her lips moving like she was trying to warn me. I wrote them down. Every single one, even the details that made no sense. A whistling noise behind her. A red light blinking in the ceiling. A scrape, like metal on concrete. Then I'd wake up with my heart pounding so hard it drowned out everything. Else 2 years passed. 2 more girls' weekends came and went. And then last fall, I received an envelope in the mail. No return address, no note. Just a photo. It was Lauren. She looked older, her hair longer, her face thinner, but it was her. She was standing in what looked like a small white room. No windows, no furniture. Her arms hung at her sides, and her mouth was stitched shut with black thread. I dropped the photo and backed away like it was going to bite me. I didn't sleep that night. Didn't eat the next day. I just stared at it, turning it over in my hands, looking for proof it was fake. But it wasn't. When I showed it to my mom, she asked if I was sure it was Lauren. When I said yes, she just closed her eyes and said, "Then don't show it to anyone else." Like that was the end of it. Like acknowledging it out loud would somehow make it worse. But I couldn't stop thinking about that room. It felt designed, intentional, like a waiting room for something. The walls were too clean, the corners too sharp. I started wondering, what if she was still alive? What if she was trying to reach me? Or worse, what if she wasn't alone in that room? Girls' Weekend had always run like a machine. Year followed the same structure, down to the hour. Friday afternoon was for arrival, unpacking, setting up the snack tabbouleh, a ridiculous buffet of trail mix, red vines, string cheese, and off-brand soda. By dinner time, we'd open our first bottles of wine, K, argue over pizza toppings, and fill in a giant poster board with our intentions for the weekend. That was a big thing in our family: intentions, not resolutions. You'd write something like "rest more," or "stop apologizing," or in my cousin Lauren's case, "stay open." That was the last one she ever wrote, actually. "Stay open," in blue Sharpie, right under a little doodle of a door. Saturday was activity day. The older women would lead hiking groups while the rest of us broke into teams for crafts or tarot. Readings or jigsaw puzzles that always had a few missing pieces. Phones were placed in a drawer in the kitchen, no exceptions. That was rule number 1, and it was unspoken but strict. No texts, no photos, no checking in. If they need you, they'll wait, my Aunt Denise used to say. Back when I was younger, it felt freeing. Now, it felt more like a trap. Rule number 2. We never left the lodge grounds alone. Not to go jogging. Out. Not to go find cell signal. Not even to grab something from the car after dark. It was framed like a safety thing, but it always struck me as more controlling than caring. It'd say things like, "The woods are tricky here," or "The paths all look the same," but we weren't kids. We were grown women being told we couldn't even walk to the firewood shed unless someone was holding our hand. The third rule was the strangest, and the one that started bothering me the most as I got older. No bringing outsiders. It had to be family, or married in, or vetted. Nobody explained what vetted meant, just that not everyone gets it. One year, my cousin Claire tried to bring her college roommate and got absolutely shut down. They told her it would disrupt the flow. When she asked what that meant, my Aunt Deborah just said, "You'll understand when you're older." Claire never came back after that. I should have thought more about that. By the time Lauren disappeared, I started noticing how intense everyone had gotten about the rules. In past years, if someone forgot their phone in their pocket, we'd just laugh it off. But now, they treated it like a betrayal. In 2020, I pulled out my phone to check the time, and my mom actually slapped it out of my hand. It's not hard, but still she'd never done that before. I asked her what the hell that was about, and she just said, "We can't mess this up." Mess what up? There was something else too. That year, when we lit the fire pit on Saturday night for the usual group circle, where we'd read our intentions aloud and then symbolically burn them in the flames, I noticed one of the older women, a great and I barely knew, quietly fold hers into her sleeve instead of throwing it in. I only caught it because I was sitting across from her, and the firelight flickered just right. When I asked my mom about it later, she said she already burned one earlier, like it was no big deal. But we never did that early. That was the whole point. Everyone did it together that same night. I heard whispering outside my window. The room I stayed in had an old wooden frame that creaked when the wind blew, so I almost wrote it off. But this wasn't wind. This was deliberate, rhythmic. A voice repeating something low and fast, like a chant or a prayer. When I got up to look, I saw 2 figures standing near the tree line. No flashlights, no phones. Just standing in the dark. Facing the lodge, facing me. I couldn't tell who they were, only that they didn't move. Not when I knocked on the window. Not when I opened it and whispered, "Hello." I blinked, and they were gone. I didn't tell anyone the next morning, because deep down, I already knew they'd say it was a dream. That year I went back because I thought I had to. After the photo of Lauren, after the silence that followed from the police, after months of feeling like I was losing my grip, I needed to see the others. I told myself that being around the family would feel grounding, familiar, maybe even healing. But the second I pulled into the gravel lot behind the lodge, I felt it. That low, crawling pressure under my ribs. Like stepping into a room right after someone screamed. Everything looked the same. The wooden porch sagging in the middle. The half-burned citronella candles still sitting in the same mismatched holders. The chalkboard signed by the front door that read "No Boys Allowed." But it didn't feel the same. Everyone acted like it was just another weekend. Hugs, wine bottles opening, blankets folded over the back of the couch like always. But the smiles were tighter. Conversations felt clipped, like everyone was speaking from a shared script and couldn't go off book. I asked my Aunt Deborah if we were doing the usual hike Saturday morning, and she said, "Of course. The Holt way never changes." But her tone made it sound less like an answer and more like a reminder, like I'd forgotten something important. I didn't push. I tried to go through the motions. I unpacked. I turned in my phone without protest, even though every part of me screamed not to. I wrote my intention on a fresh card like we always did to find peace, in plain block letters, and pinned it on the corkboard in the dining room. But I kept glancing at the space next to mine where Lauren's would have gone. No one else seemed to notice, or if they did, they didn't say anything. The wall looked wrong, like a puzzle with one missing piece and everyone pretending. It wasn't supposed to be there that night. We played a board game that Lauren had brought one. Here's something silly with trivia questions and dares written in Sharpie on index cards. Usually it was lighthearted fun, but this time the dares felt sharper. My cousin Dana was told to take off one sock and toss it into the fireplace. Aunt Sheila had to sit blindfolded in the kitchen for 10 minutes while the rest of us stayed. In the living room, nobody laughed. When my turn came, I picked a card that said, "Say something you regret, or stay silent and lose your next turn." I opened my mouth to speak, but nothing came out. All I could think about was Lauren. I passed. Saturday came, and we hiked like always. Same trail, same spot where we'd stop and take the group photo. But this time, when we reached the overlook, no one took out a camera, not even Aunt Deborah, who always brought her Canon with the zoom lens. We just stood there in silence until someone mumbled that we should head back. No one argued. No one said anything at all. Later that afternoon, I found something while cleaning up after lunch, tucked under a chair cushion on the screened porch. It was a folded piece of paper with a list of names. All women, all in capital letters. I recognized about half of them cousins, great taunts, my grandmother, but the rest, I had no idea who they were. Some had check marks next to them, others had an X. At the bottom, there were 2 names that had been underlined 3 times. Margot and Lauren. My throat closed up. I stuffed the paper into my pocket and went straight to the bathroom to lock the door. I stared at it for 10 minutes, then flushed it piece by piece down the toilet. I didn't know what I was looking at, but I knew I wasn't supposed to find it. That night, during the intention circle, I waited for someone to say Lauren's name, but no one did, not even a passing mention. When it was my turn, I started to say something I don't even know what exactly, but I saw the look my mother gave me. Flat. Warning. Not scared, just tired. She'd already decided what I was allowed to say and was daring me to disobey. So I burned my card in silence and kept my eyes on the flames. Later, I tried to talk to my cousin Dana in private. She was always the closest to Lauren besides me. We were brushing our teeth in the tiny hallway bathroom when I finally blurted out, "Don't you think it's weird how no one talks about her?" Dana paused, toothbrush in her mouth, and stared at me in the mirror for a long time. Then she said we all miss her, like she was reciting something practiced. I asked her if she remembered the photo I got in the mail, the one with Lauren in the windowless room. Her hand froze midair. She didn't answer, just spat into the sink, and left the room without looking back. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, listening to the creak of footsteps overhead that didn't match the number of people I knew were in the house. I heard water running in the bathroom, even though no one got up. And once, just one sigh heard humming, soft, gentle, off-key. A lullaby I didn't recognize, drifting through the vents like breath from a locked room. The next morning, I woke up to find my toothbrush missing, and not just misplaced, gone. The toiletries bag I'd zipped up the night before was wide open on the counter, its contents spread like someone had rummaged through it in a hurry. At first, I thought maybe Rachel or one of the others had borrowed it without asking. But when I asked around, no one admitted to even being in the bathroom after midnight. That wouldn't have been strange except for the fact that the guest log in the hallway, the little notebook we all signed every time we used the shared bathroom, had a name written in shaky letters at 2:13 a.m. It just said, Lauren. My blood ran cold. I tried to show it to my mom, but by the time I brought her back to the hallway, the page was going to ripped clean from the spiral like it had never been there. That same afternoon, while most of the others were outside making wreaths from dried vines and painted pine cones, I slipped away and wandered toward the edge of the woods. I told myself I was just getting fresh air, but I needed space to think, to breathe, to clear the suffocating sense that I was the only one awake while the rest of them were sleepwalking through something awful near the tree line I found. Footprints in the mud barefoot, small, like a child's, but they weren't recent. They looked weathered, softened at the edges like they'd been there a few days. I followed them for about 20 feet before they disappeared under a patch of leaves. I bent down to brush them aside, and that's when I saw it. A small scrap of fabric, white, frayed, with a single black stitch running across it. I didn't take it. I just stared for a long time, then covered it back up and walked away. That evening, things started unraveling fast. Dana wouldn't talk. To me, she kept glancing at the other women like she was waiting for a cue. When I tried to sit next to her during dinner, she got up and moved her plate without a word. It was like I'd done something to her, crossed a line she hadn't drawn yet but still expected me to see. My mom, meanwhile, acted like nothing was wrong. She joked about the casserole being overcooked, poured herself a second glass of wine, and pretended not to notice that no one was eating the dessert. Not one slice of cake was touched, and yet everyone kept saying how good it looked. After dinner, I went to the kitchen to rinse my plate, and that's when I noticed the Old Spice rack above the sink. It had 12 glass jars, each labeled in faded marker, but one of them caught my eye. The label was smudged, but I could just barely make out the word Lauren scrawled under the name of a dried herb I didn't recognize. But it wasn't handwritten. In the usual style, it was smaller, tighter, almost scratched in. When I unscrewed the lid, the jar was empty. Nothing but a faint chemical smell that made my eyes sting. I quickly put it back and left the kitchen, my heart pounding in my throat. That night, someone or something knocked on my bedroom door. It wasn't a normal knock. It was slow, too spaced out to be impatient, too rhythmic to be random. Knock's pause. For more than silence. I held my breath, staring at the handle, waiting for it to jiggle. It didn't. But when I finally found the nerve to open the door, there was nothing there, just a folded piece of paper lying on the floor. This time, it wasn't a list. It was a sketch. A crude drawing of the lodge, viewed from the outside with small figures inside. Every room had a face drawn in the window blank circles for eyes, wide gaping ovals for mouths, except for one window, mine, which was drawn completely blacked out. At breakfast the next morning, I tried to confront them. I told everyone about the note, the drawing, the footprints near the woods. I even mentioned the spice jar, though I left out the name written on it. I expected panic, confusion, maybe even concern. What I got instead was silence. And then, one by one, each of them returned to their conversations like I hadn't said a word. I was sitting there, unraveling in front of them. They just went back to sipping their tea and buttering their toast. That was the moment. I realized something I still haven't been able to say out loud. It wasn't that they didn't believe me, it was that they already knew. That night, I didn't even pretend to sleep. I lay in bed, fully dressed, back against the headboard, one hand on the flashlight I'd hidden in my pillowcase. Every sound in the house felt amplified, floorboards expanding, pipes groaning, wind brushing the windows, but I was listening. For something else? A shift. A whisper. Something human trying not to be. Around 2:40 a.m., I heard the creak of the back porch. The soft thud of shoes on old wood. I slid out of bed and tiptoed to the window, staying low. Outside, just at the edge of the light, were 3 figures. No flashlights, no coats. Just white nightgowns swaying in the breeze like curtains. They stood in a triangle, hands clasped. One of them raised something in the air, maybe a candle, maybe a jar, and the others bowed their heads. Then, all at once, they turned and looked up toward my window. I dropped down before they could see me, or maybe they already had. The next morning, my toothbrush was back perfectly placed in the toiletry bag, zippered shut like it had never been touched. But I didn't use it. I wrapped it in tissue and shoved it deep in the bottom of my suitcase. It wasn't about the object anymore. It was the message behind it. We can touch what's yours. We can replace it. We can make you doubt it was ever gone. I sat on the edge of the bed for a long time after that, trying to gather the strength to leave. But leave where? I had no car, no phone, and the nearest town was 15 miles down an unlit stretch of gravel road. And more importantly, every person I could ask for help, my mom, my cousins, my aunts might already be in on it. Sometimes I still try to convince myself it could have all been in my head. I imagined it, made it worse, added pieces that weren't really there. That trauma twisted it. But then I remember the girl in the loft, her face, her fear. Lips half-stitched shut. Don't invent something like that. You don't wake up with dirt in your mouth and blood on your arms and call it a hallucination. Something real happened to me out there. Something the rest of them don't want remembered. And now, something's following me. It started small, a penny cone on my doorstep. Fresh one, sticky with sap, even though the trees out here are mostly cedar. Then the jar. A small glass container, the exact size and shape as the ones from the lodge's spice rack, placed carefully inside my mailbox. No label, no smell. Just a piece of black thread curled inside like a sleeping snake. I threw it away, tried to ignore. I told myself it was a sick prank. But then, last week, I received a package with no return address. Inside was a photograph. It was me taken from behind as I stood at my kitchen sink, washing a mug, hair tied up, shoulders hunched from tension. The timestamp at the bottom wasn't from a security cam or a phone. It was printed in red block letters like it came from an old film camera. The time read, 2:13 a.m. The back of the photo had one sentence written in block letters, "Stay open." The same words. Lauren wrote the last time any of us saw her. It hit me as I was watching the others clean up after breakfast, moving in eerie sync like they were following silent choreography. This wasn't about Lauren disappearing randomly. It wasn't about some stranger taking her off the highway. It was about girls' weekend. About whatever this had become, whatever it had always been, quietly behind the laughter and wine and puzzles. Lauren had seen something, broken a rule. Maybe she'd tried to leave early.
Be late, she asked them.
Wrong question to the wrong person. And they couldn't let that happen. I remembered the list I'd found earlier. The one with names marked and crossed out, and it suddenly made sense. These weekends weren't just reunions, they were selections. I thought about how the group had gotten smaller over the years, always blamed on scheduling or family conflicts or she moved away. But now I realized they weren't just leaving. They were being removed, replaced, maybe even used. Whatever this was, it operated under the cover of tradition, built on the assumption that no one would question the people closest to them. Later that afternoon, I tried one last time to reach someone I trusted. I caught Dana alone on the side, deck tying kindling for the fire pit. I told her I knew what was going on, that I'd seen the figures, heard the whispers, found the list. Her eyes welled up, and for a second, I thought she was going to tell me everything. But instead, she just shook her head and said, "You weren't supposed to notice yet." I grabbed her arm and begged her to explain. Her voice cracked when she whispered, "It's not about punishment, it's about balance." Then she pulled away and went back inside like nothing had happened. That word stuck with me, balance, like something owed. It's like a scale that had to be kept level. I started thinking back to all the rules: no phones, no outsiders, no leaving alone. Not to protect us, to control us, to contain us. And then I remembered something even worse, Lauren's last intention card. Stay open. What had she meant? Stay open to what? Or for what? That night, during the group's final circle, I stayed. Quiet. We sat around the fire pit like always, reading our cards aloud, burning them one by one. When it was my turn, I lied. Mine said let go, and threw it into the flames before anyone could ask to see it. My mom watched me too long afterward, not suspicious, expectant, like she thought I was finally understanding. Like maybe now I belonged, but I don't, and I never will. Because I know the truth now. Lauren didn't vanish. She was given. I had no plan, no car, no cell phone, no help. Just a gnawing certainty in my gut that if I stayed another night in that lodge, I wouldn't leave. Not really. Not as myself. Not intact. They were setting up for our final meal, a closing tradition where we all dressed in white and shared reflections. I slipped out the back, past the fire pit, down the narrow trail that led behind the property. I didn't know exactly where. It went only that it curved toward the main road, or at least I hoped it did. The air was thick with pine and late summer humidity, and every step felt like I was moving through molasses. My pulse screaming for me to run faster, to not look back. To just go. I made it maybe half a mile before I heard them calling my name. Not shouting, not angry, sweetly, like they were playing a game. It's like they already knew exactly where I was and just wanted to give me the illusion of escape. "Margot, dinner's almost ready," someone sang. "You don't want to miss your turn?" My stomach twisted. I kept moving, slipping on wet roots, crashing through brush, ignoring the branches slapping my arms and the sharp stab of thorns. Across my shins. My legs were cramping, lungs burning, but I didn't stop. Not until I heard the sound that truly broke me. Footsteps. Close. Too close. More than one pair. And then laughter, soft, unhurried, as if they weren't chasing me. At all. As if they were hurting me, I veered off the path and ducked behind a downed tree, trying to control my breath. Through the gaps in the brush, I saw two figures pass. One of them was Dana. Her face looked blank in a way I can't explain. Open to wide mouth in a straight line, like she was trying not to feel anything. The other was my mother. She was barefoot, holding something in her hands. At first I thought it was a flashlight, but it wasn't. It was a jarge, just like the one from the spice rack. She held it carefully, reverently, like it meant more than. I could understand. I waited until they were gone, then bolted in the opposite direction, ignoring the sound of twigs snapping behind me. Eventually, I came across a narrow dirt road. It was barely wide enough for a car, but it had fresh tire tracks. I followed it until I saw an old shed maybe once used for tools or firewood, but now it looked abandoned. I ducked inside, slamming the door quietly behind me, heart in my. The inside smelled like mildew and old gasoline. I sat in the far corner, knees pulled to my chest, and waited. For what I didn't know? Help? Morning? A miracle? The sun was setting fast, shadows crawling across the floor. I thought I was alone until I heard movement in the loft above me. I looked up and saw a shape small, crouched, breathing. When I whispered, "Hello," the shape jerked violently, then slowly came into the light. It was a girl, maybe 15. Her hair was a mess of knots, her clothes torn and stained. But it was her eyes that stopped me. Wide, wild, like a cornered animal. She didn't speak, just watched me with pure terror. I reached toward her, and she flinched hard. That's when I saw the thread. A thick, black line, starting at the corner of her mouth and trailing to her jaw. It wasn't fully stitched, but it had been started. My throat closed. This wasn't new. This wasn't unique to Lauren. There were others. Before I could say anything else, headlights flooded the inside of the shed through a crack in the boards. A vehicle, maybe the van we used for the retreat, had pulled up silently. Doors opened. Footsteps. Multiple. The girl in the loft scurried back into the shadows, eyes pleading with me not to move. I did the only thing I could. I hid. Crawled. Under the old workbench, pressing myself against rusted metal and splintered wood, trying not to breathe. I heard voices. Calm. Casual. Check the back. She can't be far. And then closer. My mom's voice. She just needs time. She'll come back. They always do. If not, we'll help her decide. They didn't find me. Not that night. After what felt like hours, the footsteps faded and the lights disappeared. I waited until the silence grew unbearable, then ran. I ran until my legs gave out. I crawled until the road found me. Eventually, headlights approached from the opposite direction, an actual pickup, some local man heading home from a shift. He saw me stumbling out of the woods, bleeding, barefoot, face streaked with dirt and panic. He didn't ask questions, just unlocked the door and drove me to the nearest town. I told the police everything, or tried to. They didn't believe me, said I must have gotten disoriented in the woods, said I'd had some kind of psychotic break. That trauma can manifest in strange ways. They questioned me about drugs, about my history of depression. When I asked about the lodge, they looked up the address and told me there had been no group staying there that weekend. The place had been marked closed for seasonal repairs. They told me to get some rest, to let the shock wear off. But the real shock was still coming. The official report said exhaustion, dehydration, and acute stress response. That's how they explained me stumbling out of the woods barefoot and bleeding, rambling about rituals and stitched mouths. They didn't press charges, thank God, but they also didn't investigate. Not really. Patrol car did a half circle around the property 2 days later and found no evidence of wrongdoing. The lodge had already been cleared out. Clean. Locked. Empty. The name on the rental records? Corporate shell company out of Delaware? I asked for a follow-up. He said there was nothing to follow up on. No one had seen a group of women arrive that weekend. No one filed a permit. There were no photos, no witnesses.
No proof.
I moved 2 months later. Got as far from North Carolina as I could afford, rented a 1-bedroom apartment in a 2nd story. Walk up outside Flagstaff. My therapist tells me I'm making good progress, which I guess means I'm sleeping a few hours at a time and not checking every closet twice before I go to bed. But I still see her sometimes. Lauren, not in dreams anymore, in flashes, in reflections. In the sound of footsteps on the stairs at 3 a.m., she never speaks. She just looks at me with eyes that say, "You got out." I didn't. I've tried reaching. Altadena called, texted, even mailed a letter to her last known address. Nothing. Her number's been disconnected. Her social media pages are gone, like she never existed. I asked a mutual friend if they'd heard from her, and they just shrugged. She's probably laying low, they said. Family stuff. And when I pressed harder, they changed the subject. Fast. Too fast. I never set out to make a documentary about a serial killer. That was never the plan. Originally, I just wanted a portfolio project, something to put on my grad school applications. I was a journalism major at Indiana State 3 months from graduation, broke, burnt out, and terrified of being irrelevant. Everyone in my program had some kind of edge. An internship at a paper, a viral blog, connections at NPR. Me, I had a secondhand camera, a $14 tripod, and access to the university's digital lab for editing. My goal was simple: make something. Gripping, maybe even a little controversial, that could prove I had what it took to tell real stories. I figured if I couldn't get hired after graduation, at least I'd have this one thing to point to and say, look, I found something that mattered. I stumbled onto the Family Man case during a late-night research spiral. I'd been reading about unsolved crimes in the Midwest, trying to find a hook that wasn't overexposed. Bundy, Gacy, the I-70 killer, those stories had all been picked clean. But then I found a series of old local articles from the early 2000s about a string of bizarre, grisly home invasion murders in 3 neighboring states: Indiana, Ohio, and Illinois. Each case had the same disturbing setup. A family of 4 or 5 found dead at the dinner table, parents posed with cutlery in their hands, children's seats left empty. Some cases, the children were missing entirely. There were never any. Signs of forced entry, doors locked from the inside, alarm systems untouched, no fingerprints, no DNA, just the same staging. The press dubbed him the Family Man, and then the story just vanished. That's what caught me. No podcast specials, no books, barely a thread on Reddit. A killer who struck at least 7 times across state lines and then disappeared without resolution, without fanfare, without closure. That was my hook. That was my angle. I pitched it to my documentary studies professor under the title, The Ones He Left Behind, and was stunned when he said yes. I figured he'd dismiss it as tabloid trash, but instead he leaned forward in his chair and said, "Be careful. This one never made sense." I started assembling my team, if you could even call it that. It was really just me and my roommate, Eli, who handled sound and boom mic work, and Jess, a photojournalism major who was dating Eli and had a natural eye for composition. We didn't have permits. We didn't have money. But we had time, curiosity, and the blind optimism of people too young to imagine what could go wrong. We spent 3 weeks pulling records, making calls, scouring through courthouse archives and police blotters. Every piece of evidence pointed to one horrifying pattern. The killer had been invited in. Neighbors never saw Brakeens. Victims' families never reported strangers in the area. But somehow, someone got in and was welcomed. That detail haunted me. One article mentioned an unnamed witness, a cousin of one of the victims, who claimed a man had been staying with the family in the days leading up to the murders. She called him Uncle Will. Said he wore wire-rimmed glasses, carried an old video camera, and always smelled like eucalyptus. She also said the parents introduced him like he'd known them forever, but no one could verify who he was. No records, no background, no fingerprint matches. Just gone. And what really chilled me was the last quote in the article, buried at the bottom like it didn't matter, girl said. He told us stories at night, made us promise not to tell. The ending? I knew right then. This wasn't just a killer. It was a ritual. Jess didn't love where it was going. She said it felt exploitative, digging through other people's grief, pulling at wounds just to get our names out there. Told her I understood, but deep down, I didn't. I wasn't doing this for clout. I needed to understand. Not just what happened to those families, but how something like this could be buried, erased, left to rot in the corner of public memory. Like a box of old videotapes no one wanted to claim, and that's where the project really started. Because 1 week later, I received an anonymous package at my dorm. Inside were 32 unmarked VHS tapes, no return address, no letter. Just a postmark from Peoria, Illinois. It's a piece of masking tape stuck to the box lid that said, "He's still out there." I didn't open the tapes right away. I stared at that box for nearly 2 full days, unsure if playing them would get me answers or nightmares. Eventually, Eli convinced me to rent an old TV VCR combo from a secondhand electronics shop just off campus. We hooked it up in the basement rec room of our dorm, curtains drawn tight. The first tape had no label, just black plastic, and that faint powdery smell of dust and time. When we pressed play, there was no static, there was no sound, just a slow pan. Across a quiet dining room, a real one, not staged. The table was set for 5, everything neatly arranged. Then a voice off camera said, "Okay, now smile for your Uncle Will." The camera zoomed slightly, shaky but deliberate. A man stepped into frame, adjusting a place setting. His back was to the camera, face never shown. And then the screen. Cut to black. That was all it took. Jess didn't want to watch another one. She said it felt like crossing a line we didn't fully understand. Eli, on the other hand, was all in. He said we were sitting on something huge, a primary source archive tied to an uncaught serial killer. And me? I felt something deeper. That same pressure in my ribs I'd felt the night I discovered the case. Like we'd already made contact with something real, and it was looking right back at us. We watched 2 more tapes that night. The pattern became clearer. Each one was filmed days or even weeks before a documented murder. Always from inside a home. Always families. Sometimes he'd interact with them, laughing, helping cook, playing with the kids. Other times he stayed behind the lens, like he was studying them. And in every tape, just before it cut off, there was one consistent moment. He'd point the camera at the dinner table and say, "This is where we'll remember you." That line echoed in my head as I started mapping our plan. We decided to focus on 3 confirmed crime scenes, all within driving distance. All still structurally intact according to property records. 1 in Shelbyville, Indiana, 1 outside Dayton, Ohio, and the last just west of Springfield, Illinois. We wanted to keep the group small and mobile. Eli offered to drive his ancient green Jeep Cherokee, and Jess reluctantly agreed to come if she could sleep in hotels instead of crashing. In the car, used a fake name to rent a low-budget Sony HDV camcorder, just so our actual names wouldn't appear on the equipment registry. I didn't know what we were walking into. I wasn't taking chances. I also started reaching out to surviving relatives, but most either ignored my emails or told me in no uncertain terms to stop contacting them. But one person did respond. McClellan, the cousin of the girl who mentioned Uncle Will. She lived in a small town near Decatur and agreed to meet me on one condition: no cameras, no recordings, no names used in the final cut. I promised, though I knew if we got something big, those promises might start to stretch. The 3 of us met twice a week for the next month, going over travel plans, shot lists, backup locations, and gear. Jess printed laminated folders with our schedule and maps. Eli digitized every VHS tape and uploaded them to a password-locked drive. I made a checklist of supplies: batteries, portable chargers, pepper spray, backup keys. Every time I added something new, I felt like I was packing for something more dangerous than I wanted to admit. What I didn't notice, what I should have, was that the project was changing us. Eli started staying up all night rewatching the tapes, pausing and screenshotting frames, convinced he could see reflections of the killer in mirrors or windows. Jess became quiet, distracted, and jumpy. She told me she'd woken up one night to find a piece of masking tape stuck to her apartment door blank. No message, but placed just so, like a signal. I told her it was probably someone playing a prank, but deep down, I didn't believe that. Week before we were set to leave, I came back to my dorm to find my door propped open. Nothing inside was missing, nothing broken, but someone had been there. I knew it. The chair by the window had been moved slightly, angled toward the bed. The curtain was drawn open on one side. Worst of all, the binder with my notes on the project was gone, not stolen, photocopied. It was back on my desk, everything exactly as I left it, except the last page, which wasn't mine. A new page. A still photo from one of the tapes, printed on cheap printer paper and tucked into the binder. It was a frame I hadn't seen before, an empty dining room, lit by candles, no people. But scrawled in marker across the bottom of the image were 5 words. You've been invited to. I didn't tell Jess or Eli. Not yet. I told myself it was a scare tactic. Maybe some other obsessive who'd found the same case online and wanted to rattle us. But the truth was, the deeper we went, the more it felt like we weren't chasing. A story, it felt like the story had been waiting. We left campus just after sunrise on a cold Thursday in October. The Jeep was loaded down with camera gear, clothes, printed maps, backup hard drives, and more anxiety than I cared to admit. The first stop on our route was Shelbyville, Indiana town of maybe 20,000 people with a kind of forgettable downtown. That looks like it hasn't changed since. 1997. Our destination was a single-story brick ranch house tucked behind an overgrown hedge. One of those cookie-cutter suburban homes with vinyl shutters and a cracked driveway. According to public records, it had been foreclosed in 2009 and sat unsold ever since. We weren't technically breaking in. We found a back window with a busted lock. But we definitely weren't supposed to be there either. Inside, the air was stale and sour, thick with mildew and a faint hint of something sharper, maybe rodent droppings or just the echo of old bleach. Dust covered every surface. The living room carpet had that sun-faded pattern you only get when furniture stays. Unmoved for decades, the kitchen still had a rotary phone on the wall and a yellowing calendar from 2003. Everything felt untouched, like the house had been sealed the moment the bodies were removed, and no one had the heart or the courage to reclaim it. Walked in with her camera already rolling, whispering to herself, "This place is wrong." She wasn't talking about the design. We set up our equipment in what had once been the dining room. It was obvious even without the police photos, this was where it happened. The table was gone, but the marks on the floor showed where it used. To sit, the chandelier above hung slightly off-center, one bulb broken. On the far wall, someone had tried to scrub off what looked like old red crayon, except the color hadn't faded like wax should have. Eli, always the tech guy, pulled out a thermal camera just for fun. When he aimed it at the wall, he frowned. "Cold spot," he muttered. "Colder than the window." We stood there in silence, staring at a patch of paint like it could answer our questions. I wandered toward the hallway and found myself drawn to a door at the end narrow. White with the faint outline of child-sized stickers, long since peeled away. It opened to a bedroom no bigger than a motel closet. Pale blue wallpaper peeled in sheets. On the floor, half hidden beneath dust, was a broken music box. I picked it up without thinking and opened it. It didn't play music, but something inside rattled. I turned it upside down and a small metal key dropped out like the kind used to lock a diary or drawer. I didn't say anything right away. I just slipped it into my pocket and told myself it was probably nothing. That night, we stayed at a cheap motel 2 exits off the highway. It's the kind where the front desk clerk doesn't look up and everything smells faintly like pine cleaner and desperation. Jess barely spoke during dinner, and Eli wouldn't stop talking. "We should rewatch the tape that matches the Shelbyville house," he said, pulling out his laptop. "See if anything matches up, like furniture placement." Door, frames, light fixtures. He was excited, too excited. I watched Jess push her mashed potatoes around her plate like she was trying to erase them. When she finally spoke, it was barely above a whisper. "I swear I saw something move in the hallway." "Just for a second." Eli laughed. "It's an empty house. Shadows, dust, mice." But I didn't laugh, because I'd seen it too. Later, that night, while reviewing footage on my laptop, I found something I couldn't explain. In the background of one clip, barely visible through the dusty glass of the dining room window, was a reflection. Just a hint. A blur of movement that didn't match any of our positions. It passed behind Jess while she was filming the broken chandelier. Quick, like someone walking past a door frame. But we were the only ones inside. I scrubbed back, paused, zoomed, no face, no definition, just motion. I didn't tell them. I didn't want to be the next person to plant a seed we couldn't unsee. The first night ended with a knock on our motel door. 3 knocks. Slow. Then silence. We all froze. Eli walked to the door and looked through the peephole. "Nobody," he said. "Probably just drunk teens or a housekeeping check." But he didn't open the door. Neither did I when I walked outside the next morning to grab coffee from the lobby. I noticed a piece of masking tape stuck to the side mirror of our Jeep. Nothing written on it, just pressed there carefully, like a tag, like someone wanted to let us know they'd already been close enough to touch us. By the second stop, something between us had shifted. The energy in the Jeep on the way to Dayton was tense, clipped. Jess spent most of the ride with her earbuds in, staring out the window and pretending not to hear Eli's nervous jokes. Was trying to keep things light, throwing out film ideas for the next project, rambling about documentary styles, but it just made the silence feel heavier. I didn't say much either. Kept thinking about the key from the music box, still zipped into the inside pocket of my jacket. I hadn't shown it to anyone. I don't even know why. Something about it felt private, important. But the longer I kept it, the more it felt like it was burning a hole through the fabric. The house in Dayton had been partially renovated. New owners had moved in years after the murders, stayed for 2 years, and then left abruptly, citing unresolved issues with the property. According to real estate forums, the listing agent refused to show the house at night. Still, it was empty now, another foreclosure. This one was harder to access. No unlocked windows, no broken doors. We ended up bribing a locksmith with a fake story about a missing deed and a last-minute showing for a family member. He didn't care. $60 in cash, and we were inside. Right away, I noticed how warm the house was, not just from the sun, stale warm. Air that had sat too long without movement, heavy and close. Jess said she felt dizzy almost immediately, and stepped back outside. Eli and I moved through the house, filming in slow passes, and the layout was eerily similar to Shelbyville. Another dining room framed by an archway, another kitchen with peeling vinyl and a single window over the sink. I kept waiting for something obvious, a symbol, a message, some forgotten trace, but all we found were impressions. Scratches on the baseboards, closet with a latch that locked from the outside, kid's drawing pinned to the back of a bedroom. Door that showed a house with 5 figures inside, and a 6th one standing just outside. It's watching. That night in the motel, Jess broke down. She said she'd been having dreams. It's not nightmares, exactly just repeats. Same room, same sequence. A man standing at the foot of her bed, not moving, not speaking, just watching. She said he never blinked. She'd wake up gasping and look at the clock, and it was always the same time, 3:12 a.m. She'd chalked it up to stress at first. But then it started happening even during her naps, even when she didn't realize she was falling asleep. Eli told her to take melatonin and pushed a bottle across the table. She stared at it like he'd just offered her poison. Then she turned to me and said something I'll never forget. What if he's not just in the tapes? What if he needs to be watched? I tried to laugh it off, said something dumb about ghosts and energy transfer, but deep down, I knew exactly what she meant. Every time we watched a new tape, I felt that crawl behind my ears, like the air got heavier, like someone was learning me, adapting, becoming clearer. The next morning, one of our batteries was missing. Not dead. Gone. Eli swore he hadn't touched the pack. Jess was already convinced it meant something. I told them it could have fallen under the seat, but we tore the Jeep apart and found nothing. Later that day, I noticed something worse. Copy of the project notes the full timeline I kept with dates. Case files, contact names, and travel records had been altered. Not dramatically, but just enough. 2 dates were swapped. One location name had been replaced with a different one. At first, I thought I was just tired and misremembering. But I'd highlighted certain details in specific colors. Now, those highlights were in the wrong places. I didn't tell the others. That night, Eli offered to sleep in the Jeep, said he wanted to clear his head. I think he just wanted distance from Jess, who hadn't spoken more than 10 words all day. Around 1 a.m., I heard movement outside my room. A door opening, light footsteps down the hall. I peeked through the curtain and saw Jess, standing, barefoot in the motel parking lot, staring up at the sky. Her mouth was moving. She wasn't talking to anyone I could see, just murmuring something over and over like a prayer. She didn't remember it the next day. We reached the 3rd location just outside Springfield Under. A bruised sky thick with low clouds and an air pressure that made your ears pop. The house was older than the others, 2 stories with peeling white siding and ivy choking the porch railings. According to archived property records, it had once belonged to a retired pastor and his wife. They and their 3 children had been the last known victims in the family man case. Unlike the others, there had never been a tape linked to this. How's that least? Not in the box I'd received. That made it different. That made it worse. There was no script to follow, no visual reference. Just a single crime scene photo leaked to a small-town paper that showed the family dining room in unnatural silence. Chairs all turned inward like the table had swallowed its guests whole. We didn't break in this time. The front door was already unlocked, the knob loose and rattling. Eli looked at me with raised eyebrows but didn't say a word. Inside the house was somehow cleaner than we expected, like someone had been maintaining it. Dusty, yes, but not abandoned. Or no. Cobwebs. No water damage. No broken glass. The kind of emptiness that doesn't come from time, but from intentional absence. It felt hollowed out. Jess stepped inside last, clutching her camera like it was a shield. We split up silently, each drifting toward different corners like we already knew our roles. I made my way to the upstairs hallway. The walls were lined with faded photo school portraits, church group shots, family vacations, but something was off. All the faces had been scratched out. Not torn, not defaced with ink, but scratched to teach, face methodically scraped away with something sharp, so only necks and bodies remained. I reached the end of the hallway and opened what I thought was a linen closet. It wasn't. It was a narrow room with a single chair in the center and mirrors covering every wall. No light fixture, no windows. Just reflections of myself from every direction, standing over that chair like a confession waiting to happen, downstairs. Jess let out a sound that wasn't quite a scream, but wasn't anything casual either. Eli and I ran down to find her in the kitchen, standing over the counter. There, sitting in a neat row, were 5 small objects. A child's sock, a silver fork, folded church bulletin, a toy car, and a disposable Camarius, the film wheel completely advanced.
Ow.
None of those. Things had been there 10 minutes ago. Jess swore she hadn't touched anything, that she'd just turned away to set up her lighting gear, and when she turned back, they were there. Eli immediately accused her of planting them, trying to create drama. She fired back, said he was. The one obsessed is the one watching the tapes over and over like they were some kind of scripture. They argued all the way back to the motel. I didn't say a word. I was still thinking about the mirror room, still thinking about how, when I stood in that chair's reflection, there was one moment, just one, when a 6th shadow crossed behind me. No sound, no footsteps, just a shape. In the glass that didn't match anyone in the house. I told myself it was a trick of the light. I told myself a lot of things that night. We tried to get some sleep. Just after 3 a.m., all of our phones lit up at once. No ringtone, just light. Jess was the first to look. She let out a shaky breath and turned the screen toward us. The image on her lock screen had changed. It was now a photo of our group taken from behind while we stood in the Springfield dining room earlier that day, except in this version, there were 4 people in the frame. Eli on the left, Jess in the middle, me on the right. And just behind me, barely visible in the dark, someone else. A man, holding something in his hand. A camera. We hadn't taken that photo. We didn't talk much the next morning. No one even mentioned the photo. Jess deleted it before breakfast. But I know she made a backup first. I saw her airdrop it to her laptop, fingers shaking. Eli stayed outside most of the day, pacing the parking lot like a man rehearsing an alibi. I tried to review footage from Springfield, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling long enough to load the files. None of us wanted to admit it, but something was following us. Not metaphorically, literally. Something that knew where we were going before we got there. Something that had walked the same halls we had, stepped in the same rooms, left objects behind, not as clues, but as warnings. The family man wasn't a story we were telling anymore. We were inside it now. That night, Eli disappeared. We were supposed to check out of the motel early the next morning, but I noticed his bed hadn't been slept in. His backpack was still on the floor, his charger still plugged into the wall. His boots lined neatly by the door, but he was gone. At first, Jess and I assumed he'd gone out for air or coffee. His phone went straight to voicemail. We checked the parking lot, no sign of him. We searched the surrounding roads, gas stations, even the edge of a nearby cornfield. Nothing. He was just gone. Then I saw it. A single VHS tape had been slipped under our motel door. No label, just like the others. Out. But when we played it, we both stopped breathing. It was footage from our own trip. Someone had been filming us. At the Springfield house, in the Jeep, through the motel window. The tape had no sound, only grainy video that felt too close to real. The last shot showed Eli sleeping in the back of the Jeep 2 nights before, then a figure approaching from the shadows. It never reached him. The tape cut out before it did, but Jess started crying right there in the motel room. Not loud, just soft, terrified weeping. That's when I realized this was what the family man did. Didn't just kill, he watched, he waited. He made you let him in without even knowing it. I called the police, but I already knew what would happen. It took a statement, told me. Maybe Eli had left on his own, asked if there had been any arguments. Jess tried to explain the tapes. The shadows, the reflections, the missing gear. They smiled, nodded, made some notes, then left. And by the time we returned to the room, the tape was gone. There's no trace of it. Like someone had been waiting for us to leave just long enough. We packed in silence and drove home that afternoon, but it wasn't over. That night, I got an email from an account with no name. The subject line was blank. No text, just a single attachment, a video file. I almost didn't open it, but I did. Of course I did. The footage was raw, shaky, filmed from the waist like it was hidden in a coat pocket. It showed Eli, alive, sitting in what looked like a small, windowless room. His head was down. He wasn't bound, just still. In the corner of the frame was a mirror. And in the mirror, I could see the camera operator. But the face was covered with something plastic wrap, almost like cling film. And across the bottom of the screen, scrawled in red text, "He trusted me. Will you?" I stayed off social media for weeks after Eli vanished. Jess wouldn't return my texts. She dropped out of her last 2 classes and moved back to Chicago without saying goodbye. When campus security came to ask about a laptop left in an unlocked classroom, Lazai lied. I said he'd been talking about transferring. I said he'd seemed distant, maybe even depressed. The officer nodded like he'd heard it all before. He hadn't. Not really. The full truth was buried beneath hours of raw footage, hours I couldn't bring myself to review again. But even with the tapes hidden away in a locked footlocker at the bottom of my closet, I still felt it, that creeping sense that I wasn't alone, that I was being studied, watched, just like they were, just like he had done. I thought about reporting the tapes to the FBI. I even drafted the email twice. But each time I hovered over the send button, something inside me froze. It wasn't fear. Not exactly. It was doubt. What if the footage wasn't enough? What if sharing it invited something worse? What if the act of trying to stop him only made me more interesting? That's when I realized what the family man actually wanted. He didn't need to kill to win. He didn't need blood to control. He needed you to see him, to know him, to carry him with you, quietly, forever. But in that way, he never truly left. Every tape he filmed was a seed. Every new set of eyes made him stronger. That's why the families let him in. That's why they smiled at the camera. That's why the terror always started with trust. Weeks later, I received a package at my apartment. No return address, no stamps. It's just a plain cardboard box sitting. At my door, with my name written in thick black marker, inside was one Ida Miles watch. The same battered Timex he wore everywhere, the strap still fraying on one edge. It wasn't stained or broken, just returned, as if someone had borrowed it, or kept it for safekeeping. There was no note, no message. Just the watch, ticking softly like it had never left his wrist. 8 that night, I left the house and drove. For hours without direction, I ended up parked outside a church in the middle of nowhere, headlights off, engine quiet. And I cried. Not because I missed Eli, though. I did, but because I finally understood. We had been chosen. It wasn't random. It wasn't chance. We'd walked into something older than we realized, something that fed on patterns and cameras and obsession. The family man didn't just visit homes. He entered minds, waited for you to open the door. We'd given him hours of footage, dozens of locations, lists of names. Jess, Eli, and I had become the next chapter without knowing it. We weren't documenting the past. We were helping write the next verse. And the worst part? I don't know if we can ever stop it. A few days ago, a new tape arrived. Same unmarked package. This one wasn't a VHS, it was a USB drive. I haven't opened it. I've kept it in a drawer, untouched. But every night, I feel its presence like heat coming off a hidden stove. Jess emailed me for the first time in months. She said one sentence. "Did you get one too?" I didn't reply. I didn't want to know. I still don't, but I can't. Throw it away. I can't stop hearing that phrase from the old tapes playing over and over in my head like a lullaby in reverse. This is where we'll remember you. When my Aunt Linda passed away, I didn't expect to inherit anything. She'd been estranged from the family for over 20 years. Ever since she stopped showing up to Christmas dinners without an explanation and started writing letters, no. One wanted to open. She lived in a weather-beaten cabin near Tupper Lake, a place I'd only heard about when I was a kid, usually in whispers, or in that clipped tone people use when they're trying not to remember something awful. She didn't have kids, never married, and according to my mom, preferred her books and dead things. So when the lawyer called to say she'd left the cabin to me, along with everything inside, my first thought wasn't money. It was why. Me. I hadn't seen Aunt Linda since I was 12. My clearest memory of her was at a birthday party, giving me a doll with no eyes and a note that just said, "She listens better this way." My mom took it from me that same night and threw it in the garbage, muttering about boundaries and therapy. Looking back, though, I think my mom was more scared than annoyed. After that, we stopped talking about Linda altogether. She became one of those family ghosts, technically still alive, but unspoken. So when I drove up to the lake that fall, it felt less like I was visiting someone's old property and more like I was stepping into a part of the family no one else dared claim. The cabin was smaller than I imagined. It sat on a crooked foundation about 30 feet from the edge of what used to be the lake now, mostly dried out, the muddy basin cracked and dotted with brittle cattails. The front steps sagged under my weight, and the door stuck hard before it opened, like it didn't want to be disturbed. Inside, it was exactly what you'd expect from someone who died alone. Shelves stuffed with yellowing books. Jars of things that had once been plant life, maybe animals. Dust coated every surface. There were stacks of handwritten notes, newspaper, clippings, and folders labeled in shaky capital letters like Juniper Camp, File A, and Do Not Show Them This. I should have known better than to keep reading. But once I saw the words mass grave scribbled in red ink on a grocery receipt, I couldn't stop. She'd kept everything. Articles about missing kids, police reports from the 80s, maps with circles drawn in black marker, old camp flyers from a place called Camp Juniper Place that didn't exist on Google Maps anymore. At first I thought it was just obsession. People get weird when they live alone. But then I found the letters. Dozens of them, most addressed. To the local sheriff's department, some to a man named Reverend Holloway, some to me. Future reader, she wrote. You'll know this was never about just one man. You'll smell him in the soil. You'll feel him in the trees. The letters didn't make sense. At least, not yet. That first night in the cabin, I didn't sleep. The wind came off the lake bed like a whisper, and the old wood creaked like footsteps. I sat in the kitchen reading until sunrise, half expecting to hear her voice, half dreading that I actually might. I told myself it was just grief or family guilt. I told myself I'd catalog what she left, maybe sell the place and leave it behind. But I couldn't shake that feeling. The signs were all there. If only I had listened sooner. ... The next morning. I started going through the cabin room by room, telling myself I was just cleaning up. But it didn't feel like cleaning. It felt like exhuming something. Every drawer I opened seemed to contain a little more of my aunt's madness, or maybe her truth. In the bedroom closet, behind a Motheton winter coat, I found a wooden lockbox. It wasn't locked, just shut tight, like it hadn't been opened in years. Inside were photographs, dozens of them. Most were black and white, some bent at the corners, others stained. Almost all showed children campers, I assumed smiling. In front of cabins, holding fishing rods, wearing those classic 80s summer tees with bright block lettering. Camp Juniper, 1987. But a few photos had a different energy. Taken at night, grainy, awkwardly framed, groups of kids in a clearing, a man just barely in frame. In one photo, he had his hand on a child's shoulder. His face was turned, but his smile was clearly visible. There was something wrong with that smile. Under the stack of photos, I found a bundle of cassette tapes wrapped in a rubber band. Most were labeled with dates, some as early as 1984, some as late as 1990. One just said July 1991, LAST night in red marker. I didn't have a cassette player with me, but that label kept repeating in my head like a pulse. I slipped the tapes into my backpack and kept going. In the kitchen, taped to the inside of a cabinet, I found a child's drawing. Crayon on faded paper showed a circle of stick figures holding hands around what looked like a campfire. Above them, someone had drawn a tall figure with long arms and no face. Beneath it, written in a shaky scrawl, he sang us to sleep. I kept hoping I'd find something to break the tension, maybe an old recipe book, or photos of family from before everything cracked open. Instead, I found a small trunk in the attic labeled unclaimed. Inside were belongings: a Girl Scout sash, a pair of child's sneakers, a Walkman with no batteries. These weren't my aunt's things. They didn't belong to anyone she'd ever mentioned. They felt left behind, forgotten, or worse kept. I should have stopped there. I should have closed the trunk, locked the door, and driven away. But something in me had already changed. Like the cabin had shifted my balance just enough to make going back impossible. I told myself I just wanted answers. I wanted to feel what she felt, wanted to see whatever she saw in that lake bed. As night fell, I stepped out onto the porch and stared at the edge of the dried lake. The wind had picked up, and in the distance, I thought I saw something moved. A brief flicker between the reeds, like someone ducking down. I called out, "Hello?" Like an idiot. No answer, just wind. But when I stepped back inside, there were wet footprints on the cabin floor, small ones, barefoot, leading from the front door to the middle of the living room, and then stopping. That night, I slept with every light on in the cabin. I kept the fireplace going, even though it was barely October. Not because it was cold, but because silence had become unbearable. Every little creak made my chest tighten. Around 2 a.m., I woke up suddenly, not from a sound, but from a feeling like someone had leaned in close and whispered just inches from my ear. I bolted upright, heart thundering, and scanned the room. Nothing moved, but the door to the guest bedroom, one I hadn't opened yet, was wide open. I'd closed it before. Bed. I was sure of it. I hadn't even stepped inside that room since I arrived. I stood up, crossed the room slowly, and peeked inside. It was empty, just a bed, a dresser, and a wall covered in newspaper clippings. Some had fallen to the floor. Others were pinned in overlapping layers, like a patchwork of someone's unraveling. Thoughts. I spent the next morning cataloging everything in that room. The articles were all real. Verified local papers, obituaries, missing persons notices. But most had something in common: they were kids, mostly under 12. All vanished between 1986 and 1991, and nearly all of them had been reported missing in the Adirondack region. Some were linked to summer camps, a few to church retreats. One had even gone missing from a family picnic just miles from where the cabin stood. It wasn't just obsession anymore, it was evidence. My aunt had been keeping records long after the rest of the world had stopped asking questions. And in the center of the wall, she'd drawn a massive red circle around a date, July 12, 1991, the same label from the tape. That date came up over and over, scrawled on napkins, carved into the back of a cutting board, even etched faintly into the side of a wooden spoon in the kitchen. It meant something. I finally drove into town to find a thrift store that might have an old cassette player. The woman behind the counter barely looked up when I asked, just pointed toward a box of outdated electronics in the back. I found a dusty model that still worked, bought a pack of batteries, and waited until I was back at the cabin to press play. The first two tapes were just ambient sounds camp chatter, counselors doing roll call, kids laughing in the distance. But when I played the third one, the one marked July 1990, when I froze. The tape was static for the first minute. Then came a low humming sound. Not music exactly, more like a lullaby sung softly by a man. Then children's voices joined in. It was sweet at first, even comforting. But as it went on, the voices got quieter, more hesitant. The man's voice, however, never wavered. In fact, it grew louder. By the end of the recording, he was the only one singing. And just before the tape clicked off, he whispered something. Just one word. Sleep. I didn't sleep at all that night. At one point, I heard the front screen door creak open. I grabbed the fire poker and tiptoed into the hallway, expecting to find an animal, or maybe just the wind pushing things around. But the door was still latched. What stopped me cold wasn't the door, it was the voice. From somewhere deep inside the house, I heard a child's voice ask, "Are we going swimming tonight?" I stood frozen in the dark, every hair on my body standing up, trying to convince myself I was dreaming. But the voice didn't come again. And in the morning, the footprints were back, this time leading away from my bed. By the time the sun came up, I had made coffee strong enough to peel paint and pulled every document I could find from the attic and basement. The smell of old paper and mildew hung heavy in the air, like the past didn't want to stay buried. I started organizing everything by date, spreading the documents across the floor and couch. There were camp rosters, maps of the lake from different years, and stacks of letters, some typed, some handwritten, sent to officials who had clearly never responded. One letter from 1992, addressed to the Tupper County Sheriff's Office, included a list of names with the heading, "Children reported missing from Juniper, not accounted for in fire reports." 10 names, all circled. All with birthdays, photos, and dates of admission, but no records of leaving. The deeper I dug, the more the pattern came into focus. My aunt believed there was a cover-up. The fire in 91 wasn't an accident, but a purge. Ain't someone likely. A counselor had been abusing or taking children from the camp for years, and the fire had conveniently erased every record. I found an envelope labeled Witness LM. Inside were transcripts of taped interviews typed up word for word, of a woman claiming she'd escaped the camp just hours before it burned down. She said a man had taken her and several others into the woods for a night walk, but only she came back. Her memories were foggy, broken, but she described a cabin lit by oil lamps, a man who sang too slowly, and a lullaby she couldn't get out of her head, even 30 years later. She never named him, just called him the counselor. That same name showed up again and again, the counselor. It's always written in quotes, like a title, not a person. And then I found the most disturbing piece, an old Polaroid taped inside, the back of a worn Bible. The caption read, "Camp Juniper Sunday Service." In the photo, dozens of kids were lined up outside a chapel with a white cross nailed to a pine board. At the end of the row stood a man in a counselor's shirt. He wasn't looking at the camera. He was looking straight at one of the kids' hand, resting on their shoulder, but his face, it was blurred, not by motion, not by damage, but almost like it had never been printed clearly in the first place. Like something in that moment didn't want to be seen. I looked through old news clippings and found what might have been a match. In 1991, local warehouse supplying plastic goods including zip ties, burned down under suspicious circumstances, the same kind of zip ties found on the bodies in the mass grave. The article briefly mentioned a suspect, a man who worked at the camp part-time during summers, who hadn't shown up to work the day after the fire. His name, Aaron J. Holloway, a former seminarian turned outdoor educator, and the same reverend. Holloway my aunt had written letters to for years, but here's what made my stomach drop. Holloway had never been charged. He'd moved away 2 years later, opened a small church in Vermont, and disappeared from public record. No arrests. No follow-up. Just gone. I sat in the living room with the fire burning low, stacks of evidence around me, feeling like I had stepped into someone else's obsession and made it my own. It wasn't about solving it anymore. It was about finishing it. It's about understanding why my aunt chose me to carry this. I should have known better. I kept hearing her voice in my head, calm, quiet, always 3 steps ahead of me. They didn't. Listen to me. Maybe they'll listen to you. But listening came with a price, and I had no idea what it was going to cost me. The shift wasn't sudden, but it was unmistakable. The cabin started to feel occupied. It wasn't just the creaks, or the temperature drops at 3 a.m. It was the sense that something was paying attention. The tape player, which I had stopped using after the 3rd tape, began clicking on by itself during the night. Worry and spinning with no cassette inside. Once I walked into the living room to find every drawer and cabinet open, papers scattered, and neat little piles by date, almost like someone or something was trying to help me organize. Or worse, trying to guide me to something specific. One night I woke up to a strange scratching sound coming from the floorboards below my bed. When I pulled the rug back in the morning, I found marks etched into the wood, roughly carved symbols. I later matched to ones I'd seen in my aunt's notes. They were drawn by one of the kids who went missing. She called them the quiet eyes. Then came the dreams. They didn't start like dreams. It's more like memories that didn't belong to me. I'd be walking through the campgrounds at night, the sky pulsing with slow orange light like fire beyond the tree line. I could hear children singing gun-cracked, broken melody, and sea shapes moving between the cabins. A tall man with a lantern would call out softly, almost sweetly, "Let's go now. A time for the sleepwalk." When I'd wake, my feet would be dirty. Once my hands smelled faintly of pine sap and ash. I began leaving the cabin door locked with a chair propped under the handle, but each morning it would be moved, not kicked or broken, just shifted. Like someone had quietly tested it and chosen not to come in. Not yet. The lake bed. Once. Just the backdrop started pulling at me like gravity. I found myself standing on its cracked surface without remembering walking there. Sometimes I'd find small bones scattered at my feet, or bits of plastic half buried in the mud snap tie-ins, fragments of old name tags. One day I found a shoe, just one, tiny, no laces. I didn't touch it, I couldn't. But when I turned back to leave, I saw them 3 figures standing at the tree line, children watching me still, no faces I could make out. Just outlines. I blinked, and they were gone. But the mud where they stood was marked with fresh prints. and I knew then they weren't memories anymore. Something in the lake was waking up. I called the sheriff's department to ask if they'd reopened the case after the grave was found. The woman on the phone paused, then said the case had been transferred, no explanation. When I asked for a contact, she hung up. That night, someone banged on the cabin's front door just once, hard, and when I ran to check, no one was there. But resting on the porch was a Bible, not mine. Inside the front cover, "To Aaron, for the work you do." Jail pages had been torn out and replaced with camp rosters. I should have run then. I should have called someone, anyone, and walked away. But I didn't. I couldn't. The signs were all there, if only I had listened. I spent the next 2 days trying everything my aunt had written down in the old notebooks. Anything that could be considered a method of protection, or maybe an undoing. Some entries were almost ritualistic drawings of salt circles, pages soaked, with what I hoped was ink, warnings scrawled in frantic block letters, "Do not sing it back." I followed them anyway. I sprinkled salt along the door frames, burned cedar wood like she mentioned, even recited one of her strange prayers out loud while standing knee-deep in the dead lake bed. Nothing stopped it. That night, the fire went out on its own 3 separate times. The 4th time, it flared blue, then white, and the entire room smelled like singed hair. I found a child's bracelet on the floor of the kitchen the next morning. Plastic beads. The name spelled out Megan. I don't know how it got there, but I remembered that name. It was on the list in Aunt Linda's file. She had been 6. Sleep was no longer an option. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same cabin burning. I could smell pine and blood. I could hear children crying in one soft, low voice rising above them all, singing something wordless. A lullaby with no melody, just rhythm and breath. I became convinced there was something still buried out there that hadn't been found when the mass grave was uncovered. A second site, maybe deeper in the woods, something the counselor used and left behind. I grabbed a flashlight, a shovel, and the last letter my aunt had written, one I hadn't dared open until now. Inside was a map, not a topographic one, just a crude pencil sketch showing the lake, the main road. It a single word scrawled to the east. Rest. I hiked out there before sunrise, heart pounding the whole way. The woods were too quiet, every sound muted like the world had muffled itself. I reached a small clearing that matched the sketch, ringed with trees, center marked with a collapsed fire pit, and I started to dig. The earth gave to easily, like it had been disturbed before, maybe more than once. About 2 feet down, I hit wood. It wasn't a coffin. It was a box, handmade, unsealed. Inside were personal belongings, dozens of them, all child-sized. Shoes, ribbons, a tiny Bible, and a Polaroid that made my blood freeze. It was a photo of me, or someone who looked exactly like me, age 7 or 8, smiling in front of a wooden cabin with a crooked number painted above the door. 12. But I had never been to Camp Juniper, had I? That was when it hit me. My aunt hadn't just been a witness, she'd been part of it. Maybe not as a participant, but as someone who knew, who had seen, who had kept her silence because she'd been warned, maybe even threatened. Maybe that's why she disappeared from our family. Not because she was crazy, because she was scared, and because she was trying to protect someone. Me. I ran back to the cabin, but the lights were already on. I hadn't left them that way. And on the kitchen table, right in the center of all her old notes, someone had placed the cassette labeled July 1991. Only this time, it wasn't just the label. It had a note taped to it. One word. Repeat. I didn't press play on the tape, not at first. I stared at it for hours, trying to convince myself it was some kind of sick prank, that maybe a local kid had broken in to mess with me. But deep down, I knew better. No one knew I was here. No one could have planted that tape without knowing exactly what it meant. I sat in the middle of the living room floor with the recorder in front of me, heart hammering against my ribs. When I finally hit play, the lullaby began immediately. But it wasn't the same recording. This one had my aunt's voice. She was crying, not loudly, just small gasps between words. I tried, she said. I tried to warn them, he said. He'd take me if I didn't stop digging. But he didn't mean it like that. He meant forever. Forever. Then the song began. Only this time, children didn't join in. Just the counselor, soft, steady, growing louder. And at the very end, my aunt's voice again. He remembers you. I left the cabin the next morning, locked it, boarded it up, and threw the keys into the dry lake bed. But it didn't matter. The next day, I found a letter waiting for me in my apartment mailbox, no return address. Just my name printed in blocky handwriting. Inside was a camp brochure. Camp Juniper. Session dates for summer 2025. On the back was a list of campers. My name was third from the top. Someone had drawn a little circle around it. Below that, in red ink, assigned to cabin 12, I called the police. They dismissed it as a hoax. I reached out to a friend in the press. She said the story would never run. No one would take it seriously without proof. And besides, she asked, why would someone target me? That's when it hit me. This wasn't about me stumbling into a mystery. It was about being returned to one. I hadn't uncovered something. I'd been summoned. It's been 3 weeks since I left the cabin, and the footprints have started again. Small ones, just outside my door each morning. I started keeping salt across the threshold. The fire alarm goes off every night at 2 a.m., no smoke. No fire, just that high, shrill warning, and the same faint smell of pine and burning fabric. Yesterday, I found a tape recorder in my car's glove box, one I never bought. Inside it was a new tape, unmarked. I haven't played it. I won't. But I can hear it sometimes when the car is quiet, soft humming, like it's bleeding through. The plastic. The same lullaby. Always the same. He's still out there. Or maybe not out there at all. Maybe he's inside what's left of that camp. It's inside the people who carry it forward. Even if they don't know they're doing it, I should have known better. The signs were all there. My aunt wasn't crazy. She was trying to leave a warning. And now I think I understand. Some places never close. Some counselors never stop watching. And some songs, once you hear them, they never really stop playing. Last night, someone left a camp shirt folded neatly on my porch. Same design, same color. Same name stitched in the collar. Holloway. So if you ever hear someone humming at night, especially near the woods, don't listen. Don't answer. Don't sing it back. Because if you do, you'll never leave the cabin. I should have walked away the moment they slid the non-disclosure agreement across the table. This thick stack of paper, no eye contact. And a silence that lasted too long after I asked what regional discretion protocols meant. But I didn't. I needed the job. My last position ended with a cut check and an HR escort after budget downsizing, and rent wasn't going to wait. So when the South Dakota Department of Public Safety posted a midnight patrol opening, I applied. I told myself it would be temporary, just long enough to stabilize, maybe get back into a better department closer to home. It didn't matter that I had no experience with highway patrol. They called me within a day. The interview felt ... off. No real questions about my record, no deep background dive, it's just vague nods and one warning. If you see anything unusual, near mile marker 237, you report it. You don't stop. You don't engage. Got it? I nodded. I thought it was a joke. The first night on the job, they gave me a beat-up Ford Explorer with a weak heater and a handheld radio that looked like it hadn't been updated since. 1998. My field supervisor, a guy named Weller, barely introduced himself before tossing me a set of keys and saying, "Stay west of Aberdeen after sundown." Don't ask why. I laughed, but he didn't. And as he walked away, he added something I didn't understand until much later. Said, "If you see him, you won't forget the eyes." I'll try to describe them later. You can't. Drive off, his taillights disappearing into the mists that clung to the road like a warning. The air felt too still, like the whole stretch of highway was holding its breath. I shook it off, started my route, and figured it was just local superstition. Or hazing. I'll skip the boring stuff. Most of the early shifts were just long hours of monotony, empty stretches of road. The occasional jackknifed rig. One guy who called in a cow standing in the middle of the shoulder like it had materialized out of thin air. Nothing I couldn't handle, but everyone, and I mean everyone, went quiet when I brought up mile marker 237. Some would change the subject. Others would pretend they didn't hear me, and a few would just shake their heads and walk off. One older trooper, Jenkins, finally gave me a straight answer. We were sharing a bad pot of coffee around 3 a.m. when he leaned in and whispered, "There's a reason no woman lasts long out here. The hollow-eyed doesn't take men." I asked him what he meant. He just looked at me like I was already marked. Looking back, though, there were other signs I ignored. Weird entries in the dispatch logs that had been scrubbed of detail. GPS dead zones around mile 237, even though the rest of the route stayed online. One shift I passed the marker and saw a bouquet of dried flowers duct taped to the guardrail. No note. No wind to blow them over. Just standing there, like someone placed them carefully and didn't want to stay long enough to leave a name. The next night, the flowers were gone, and in their place was a shoe. One red canvas sneaker, child-sized. Sitting upright on the gravel shoulder, like it had been waiting for someone to notice. My official first day, the field came after a 36-hour orientation that was more about what not to do than any real training. They gave us printed route maps, even though every unit had GPS. When I asked why, the instructor looked me dead in the eye and said, "The system blacks out. You'll be glad you know the back roads." It wasn't a joke. Then came the list of unwritten rules. You don't stop for hitchhikers. You don't respond to CB chatter between mile 230 and 240. If your dash cam flickers, don't look at the side of the road, the one they repeated 3 times. If someone tries to flag you down and their eyes look wrong too deep, too dark to empty, just keep driving. They never explained what wrong meant, but the way they said it, you didn't want to find out after that. I was partnered for 2 weeks with a senior trooper named Sarah Keller. She had the posture of someone who never slept well and a voice that always sounded like it was still in the middle of a cigarette. She wasn't warm, but she wasn't cruel either. More like someone who had seen too much and knew better than to pretend otherwise. On our first night together, she gave me a flask not with booze, but with holy water. "No joke, it helps," she said, staring out at the empty stretch of I-29 ahead of us. "Don't ask me why, just keep it close." I laughed at first, thought maybe it was some local quirk, some old ghost story that gave the veterans something to talk about, but her hands shook when she handed it to me. I stopped laughing after that. We drove through the miles everyone warned us about. Mile 227 to 245. Twice that shift. Nothing happened. It was flat, dark, and dead quiet. A rabbit darted out once, but otherwise, it was like the road had been carved out of some place people were never meant to settle. No rest stops, no gas stations, not even a decent shoulder to pull over. But Sarah watched the road like a hawk. At one point, she told me to turn off the high beams and switch to low. Even though we couldn't see more than 20 feet ahead. "Doesn't like bright lights," she said. I asked who. She didn't answer. Just leaned forward and muttered something under her breath. Not English, not any language I recognized. When we passed mile 237, the radio crackled with static, even though no one was talking. It sounded like breathing. Just ... Breathing after we circled back to HQ around 4 a.m. I asked her point blank if she believed the stories. She didn't answer at first. Just sat there in the parking lot, engine off, both of us listening to the faint metallic ping of the cooling hood. Then she said something I've never forgotten. They made it clear that some patrols aren't about law enforcement, they're about containment. I asked what that meant, but she just gave me a tired look and said, "Don't ask questions. You won't like the answer too." That was my first night. I should have known better. But I stayed. By my 3rd week on the job, I had the whole night route memorized, but it still didn't feel like routine. Every time I crossed into the zone, around mile 237, my stomach tightened without warning. It was like a pressure drop you couldn't explain, like the whole road flexed beneath your tires and then settled into something quieter than silence. What really started to get to me, though, were the protocols no one wanted to write down. We were told to keep a folded white cloth in the glove box. No explanation, just keep it clean and unfolded. Another one, Never park directly across from the 237 marker. If you had to stop for anything accident, animal strike, whatever, you were supposed to backtrack to 234 or push forward to 240. I asked dispatch why once. All the guy said was, "That's where the static starts. It's not interference. Static." As in voices underneath the signal. People claimed they heard names, breathing. One guy even swore he heard his mother saying, "Don't open the door." His mother had been dead 7 years. I started noticing how the cars were all slightly different from each other. Every patrol SUV had the same make and model, but the wiring behind the radio consoles had been modified. Mine had a copper coil zip tied to the antenna, and someone had wedged an old dog tag behind the fuse box. Sarah told me not to remove anything. "Every trooper before you added something," she said. "None of us know what half of it means anymore, but the ones who rip it out don't last long." I didn't ask what she meant by last. But that week, Officer Brent from C Shift turned in his badge without warning, left his unit idling in the parking lot, lights still flashing, no note, no word, just gone. They found his keys in the ignition and his radio tuned to a dead frequency. When I asked if they were going to report him missing, the captain said he'd been processed. I still don't know what that meant. The weirdest rule came from a laminated card taped to the underside of the driver's sun visor. It had 3 lines in bold red lettering. Do not stop for children. Do not leave the road. Do not answer questions between 2:30 to 2:45 a.m. It read like some kind of prank, except everyone treated it dead seriously. Sarah even had the same card. In hers, only hers was faded and worn at the corners. She told me about a rookie who broke the first rule. Marsh swerved for a kid on the shoulder, ended up walking into the cornfield, and never came back out. They searched for days. All they found was his badge, bent like it had been chewed on. His family was told it was a wildlife incident. Sarah said it with air quotes. Yeah, I didn't ask what kind of wildlife they meant. Looking back, though, it wasn't the rules themselves that scared me. It was how normal they started to feel. After a while, you stop asking why. You stop questioning why your breath fogs up at certain spots even in summer, or why the radio sometimes picks up lullabies at exactly 2:37 a.m. You just keep driving. You keep the white cloth folded. You ignore the whispers. Because once you acknowledge them, once you really hear them, they know. And once they know, they follow. By the start of my 2nd month, I stopped thinking of the other troopers as co-workers. They weren't a team. We were survivors clinging to the same set of rules, nodding at each other like prisoners sharing a cell block. Nobody talked about the hollow-eyed man during official briefings. But around 3 a.m., when the shift dragged and the roads were dead, people started opening up. People started opening up. You asked the right way. There was Alvarez from C Shift, who said he once caught a girl wandering alone at mile 238. Blonde, maybe 16, in an oversized hoodie and no shoes. He pulled over, called it in, then blinked on. She was on the other side of the guardrail, just standing there. Same girl, same clothes, but she didn't blink. When he got back in his cruiser, his rear-view camera showed her staring directly into the lens. With eyes that weren't reflecting any light, he put in for a transfer the next day. It was denied. He quit instead. Another trooper, Dale, from the North District, told me flat out that he carries an empty body bag in the trunk, not for victims, but just in case something wants to follow him home. He laughed when he said it, but his hands were trembling so hard he spilled half his coffee. I wasn't joking. Then there was Haley. My shift overlap on Wednesdays. She never patrolled alone, ever. Said she didn't trust herself not to stop if she saw someone waving her down. It's not the face that gets you. She told me one night as we parked side by side in the turnout near mile 236. It's the posture. They stand still, like they're waiting to be noticed, like they already know you'll stop. That word "waiting it" stuck with me, because that's what this job started to feel like. Not a series of tasks, not protection, just waiting, watching, hoping you don't see him first. But the worst story came from someone who shouldn't have been there at all. One night, around 3:10 a.m., I pulled into the old maintenance shed to refill my thermos. Found a guy sitting on the floor inside, in uniform, sobbing. Full-grown man, built like a linebacker, curled up against the wall. He said his name was Travis. I didn't recognize him. Said he worked out of the Rosemont substation, which didn't exist. Not anymore. It had burned down in 2017. When I checked later, there were no active troopers named Travis assigned to our district. The badge number he gave me belonged to someone who went missing 3 years ago. He told me he made a stop at 237. Saw a woman lying in the road. He radioed it in. But when he turned her over, her face was his. Exactly his. Same cut on the chin. Same crooked teeth. He ran. He never found his cruiser again. Now he just waits. I never saw him after that night. But sometimes, when I pass, the shed, the door is cracked just enough for someone to watch from inside. I started to keep my own journal after that. Not because I thought anyone would believe me, but because I didn't want to forget the small things. The rules only work if you follow them exactly. I was beginning to wonder if forgetting even one would be enough to let something in. One morning, after a long shift, I noticed someone had scratched something into the driver's side window of my patrol unit. It wasn't obvious, just a shallow etching you could only see in the right light. It said, "You're already marked." I tried buffing it out. Didn't work. I even had the department issue me a new vehicle, fresh unit, clean slate. But 3 days later, the words were there again. Same spot, same depth, same message. It happened on a Thursday. It's one of those early spring nights where the sky feels too big and the ground too quiet. I had been running the same loop mile, 220 to 245. For nearly 6 hours when dispatch radioed in a stalled vehicle at 238. I hesitated. Long enough that the radio squawked again. They never give second calls unless they're serious. Said I was en route, flipped my lights, and headed in. My heart was already racing. I knew the rules. I knew the stretch. I knew something was wrong. But protocol is protocol, and I wasn't ready to lose my job over a feeling. When I crested the slight hill near the marker, I saw Iden, old white. Sedan, blinkers going, hazards flashing like a heartbeat, and someone standing beside it, hand raised in the air, just like the stories, just like the warnings. I slowed to a crawl. The figure was a mantle, thin, wearing a long coat that moved. Too much in the breeze, like it had a rhythm of its own. I kept my lights on low, my engine running, my hand on the gear shift. He didn't wave. Just held that hand up like a traffic cop, unmoving, waiting. His head turned slowly toward me, and for a split second, I almost opened the door. It wasn't that he looked familiar. It's that he looked right, like someone I trusted, someone I should help. But then he stepped closer into the beams of the headlights, and I saw his face into the eyes. Hollow, not black. Not missing. Just wrong. Like holes carved into something that had forgotten how to be human. No light reflected back. Just depth. Endless, silent depth. That's when it hit me. The rules weren't just there for safety. They were there for containment. And we were all part of it. Every time we drove past without stopping, every time we ignored the voice on the radio, we were playing our role. Keeping him bound to that stretch of highway. Not destroying him. Not fighting him, just keeping the door locked and ourselves on the right side of it. But I had slowed down. I had seen him, and when he smiled, if you can call that slow widening, curl of absence a smile, I felt something cold settle into my chest, like it had always been there, just waiting for the right moment to surface. I floored the gas, didn't look back, didn't check my mirrors, drove until the needle dipped below empty, and I coasted into the next station. Shaking so badly I couldn't hold my ID steady when the attendant asked for it. I reported the sighting. I told dispatch everything. They responded with silence. Then, finally, the same voice came through. Come, measured, tired. Acknowledged. Stay off 237 for the next 48 hours. You'll be reassigned to Urban Patrol until further notice. That was it. No questions, no follow-up. The next morning, my cruiser was gone from the lot. My nameplate was missing from the duty board. New trooper had my badge number. They never said I was fired. Never said I quit. It was like I had been rotated out. Moved off the board. But the feeling didn't leave. I couldn't sleep. Couldn't eat. The lights in my apartment would flicker every night at 2:37 a.m. My phone battery drained constantly, no matter how long it had been charging. And worst of all, I started seeing him in reflections, not standing behind me. Not obvious, just glimpses. Hollow eyes where mine should be. And that slow spreading smile. I tried to resign, walked straight into the captain's office, papers in hand, the hollow feeling in my chest growing heavier by the minute. He didn't even look at the envelope, just slid it back toward me and said, "It's not that kind of job." I asked what he meant. He nodded at the window behind me.
You're...
Already on file, you're on the route. You've seen him, it's all it takes. My mouth went dry. So I'm just supposed to keep driving that road until something happens? He leaned back, folding his hands like this conversation had happened 100 times before, till he picked someone else, or until you stop being useful. It wasn't a threat, it was a policy. They didn't need me to believe in him. They just needed me to be afraid, because fear, I was starting to understand, was the only real boundary keeping that thing in place. I stopped sleeping after that even. When I got home, even when the shift ended, it didn't matter. I'd lie in bed and stare at the door, half convinced it would creak open on its own. And sometimes, I'd hear footsteps in the hallway, too light for a neighbor, too slow for someone in a rush. Just pacing, like someone waiting for me to leave the room. My windows would fog up from the outside. Always around 2:37 a.m. Duct taped the blinds shut. Didn't matter. I started seeing fingerprints on the glass. Not full handprints, just the prints of 2 fingers, pressed together, dragging downward. I bought salt, spread it across the doorframe, changed the locks. The air inside still felt cold. Not temperature cold. Deeper than that. Like something brushing past your soul every time you moved too fast. The worst part came when I visited my sister. I hadn't told her anything. I thought I could at least keep that part of my life separate. But she met me at the door with a frown and said her daughter, my niece, 6 years old, had been having nightmares, talking in her sleep, and she said a man kept coming to her window, tall with a coat that didn't move right. She said he smiled without teeth and asked, "Is your aunt home yet?" I left before dinner. Drove for hours without turning on the radio, parked near an open field and sat in silence, trying to convince myself I hadn't cursed them just by showing up, but deep down, I knew I had. Whatever this thing was, it didn't stay behind on that highway. It came with you. It waited, followed, took its time. In the department they knew. That's the part that breaks me. They all know. Every trooper who steps into that zone is a name in a file, a line on a ledger. Some get reassigned, some vanish. Like me, just rot slowly, week by week. While pretending to do a job that isn't about law or safety, it's about feeding a system, keeping the roads quiet, making sure the hollow-eyed has something to look at without looking back. I tried calling a journalist once, an old contact from a training seminar. Left a message, told her what I'd seen. She called me back the next day and said only one thing: "You should have kept driving." The night I left for good, there was no big decision, no plan. Just a moment to 38 a.m. when the engine was idling, and I saw him again, standing in the shoulder fog. He didn't move. He didn't need to. The lights flickered, the camera died, and I heard a sound inside my cruiser that I can only describe as breathing, but not from lungs. It was like the highway itself exhaled, and I finally understood I wasn't on a patrol route. I was part of the ritual. So I turned off the lights, threw the car into reverse, and took the nearest exit without waiting for dispatch to respond. I drove straight east, no destination, no idea where the road led. I just knew it had to be a way. But the road doesn't forget. I dumped my badge at a gas station in Iowa, torched my uniform in a fire pit behind a rest stop, and crushed my department tissued. Phone under a tire iron, I thought. Maybe if I erased every sign of that life, it would stop. For a while it worked. No static on the radio. No figures on the side of the road. I even started sleeping again. But then I got a letter. No return address. Just my name, printed in block letters. Inside was a photo of my niece, sitting in the back seat of a car I didn't recognize. Her mouth was open, like she was mid-scream, but there was no sound. Just a single sentence written on the back. She saw him too. That was 3 nights ago. I haven't stopped driving since. Don't take highways anymore. I stick to state roads, old back routes, gravel stretches through towns nobody maps anymore. I sleep in the car, engine running. Sometimes I hear him. Sometimes I don't, but I know he's near. I see it in the way the light bends across my windshield. I feel it in my chest, like something is waiting for me to stop moving. I won't. I can't, because now I understand. It was never just one man. It was never just him. It's a system, a pattern, a path carved into the world like a scar that never heals. And those of us who've seen it, we don't quit, just run quieter. Looking back, though, I should have walked away before I ever signed the damn contract. The money wasn't worth it. The badge didn't protect me. And the road doesn't care who you are or what you want. It just watches, waits, and when it's ready, it opens up. Not with teeth, not with claws, but with invitation. Worst part? You'll want to say yes. You'll think you can be the one who drives through without looking, till the moment comes when he raises his hand and you remember you've seen those hollow eyes before in your own mirror.